Chapter 826. Don't rush to play after reading it. Remember to first cast a monthly vote. Starting for now, 515 Fan Festival. You can get double monthly votes. Other activities have red packets. You can also take a look. The crowd in front of the Taoist church was startled by these words, but Taoist Baisher's spirits were roused. Qin Changsheng had entered Wenshui City yesterday. In the evening, the Taoist church of Wenshui played music to announce his arrival to the world, but the Tang clan still did not respond. But at this moment, someone from the Tang clan had come, and it was none other than the second master who was rumored to hold the greatest power of the Tang clan in his hands. It was obvious that the Tang clan had spies in the church and knew that Taoist Baisher had already been exposed. An important figure like the Tang second master had immediately come to visit in order to save Taoist Baisher's life. The crowd looked to Qin Changsheng, wanting to know his decision. Would he act according to the letter and kill Taoist Baisher in the name of the Pope to establish his authority? Or would he follow the rules of the church and postpone the matter while simultaneously avoiding intensifying his conflict with the imperial court and the Tang clan? Guan Feibai gazed at Qin Changsheng's profile, not knowing what choice he would make, and not knowing what choice he hoped he would make. Are you already the true Pope, or are you still that young Taoist who had just entered the capital? Qin Changsheng suddenly raised his head to look at the sky. It was not far from dawn, and the morning sun was on the other side of the Wenshui, not far from the surface of the water. The red glow of dawn painted the distant sky, and the clouds seemed to burn, no different from the twilight. He recalled the conversation he had with Tang 36 on the great banyan tree several years ago in the very similar twilight in the Orthodox Academy. And then he recalled the conversation he had with Tang 36 on the great banyan tree again in the darkness of the Orthodox Academy after the twilight had retreated. In short, in those years, beginning in that and called the Plum Garden, he and Tang 36 had talked many times. In those conversations, they had talked about many things, not memories of the past, but prospects for the future. In the twilight, the lake of the Orthodox Academy glowed with a golden light, and the koi fish that had eaten too much gradually sank into the rotting black mud. They did not want to live like this. At the time, Xian Yuan had been using his bare waist to smash a tree on the other side of the lake. Tang 36 had said to him, "Whether it's autumn wind or spring wind, we're still young, so let us live as we please." Now that Xian Yuan had returned to White Emperor's city, there had been no news of him. Tang 36 couldn't do as he pleased anymore. He could curse whoever he wanted. If he wanted to curse someone, he definitely wouldn't just curse the 17th generation. This was because he was locked up in the ancestral hall and worshipped his own ancestors. In another conversation in the darkness, Tang 36 had said to him that he would be the Pope in the future. He said that it wasn't easy to be the Pope, right? Tang 36 said that of course it wasn't easy. Tang 36 had even told him that in the future, the Orthodox Academy would be the foundation for him to become Pope, which was why he was so passionate about the Orthodox Academy's new enrollment. This guy had long thought of the current situation. It was this guy who had been helping him arrange and deal with many things. Now that it was his turn to make a decision and deal with it, he realized that it was indeed very difficult. Qin Changsheng retracted his gaze, turned around, and walked into the hall. He made his attitude very clear. Taoist Whitestone was extremely shocked. He burst out with all of his strength and rushed like a gale, chasing after the figure in the divine gate. He wanted to fight to the death. However, he had no way of touching Qin Changsheng. Nank was still standing in front of him, staring at him in a daze. In his eyes, this little girl was a true fiend. With 3 heavy thuds, Ling Hai's iron ruler, and Lin's belt, and Zheshio's demon sword all struck Taoist Whitestone at almost the same time. Taoist Whitestone collapsed outside the threshold of the divine gate. All the bones in his body shattered, blood pouring into his lungs, his ethereal palace shattered, and he found it difficult to stand up. His eyes were filled with despair, the great panic and unwillingness at death's door transforming into a howl that was about to burst out of his lips. He wanted to inform the Tang's second master outside the forest. "Hurry and save me." Regretfully, he was unable to let out this howl. The moment he opened his mouth, A rag was shoved in like a bolt of lightning. At some point, the Archbishop of Wenshui had arrived at his side. His left hand stuffed a rag into Taoist Whitestone's mouth. At the same time, his right hand gripped a dagger and stabbed it into Taoist Whitestone's chest. The scene was very quiet. The sound of the dagger plunging into the body was extremely frightening. A small portion of the dagger was exposed. It was as calm as a mirror, exuding a faint aura of holiness. The Archbishop of Wenshui's expression was also this calm, this holy. Taoist Whitestone's eyes were wide open, his throat emitting gurgling sounds. He reached out to grab the Archbishop's clothes, but failed. He constantly twitched and struggled, like a fish that had left the Wenshui, unable to breathe, on the verge of death, yet unable to escape control. The Archbishop of Wenshui gazed at Chun Changshan's back through the divine gate and softly said, "Your Holiness, please rest for a while. I am confident that the Tang's second master will have the patience to wait a little longer." As he spoke, he held a rag to Taoist Whitestone's mouth in one hand, while the other held a dagger to Taoist Whitestone's chest. Taoist Whitestone was still twitching and twitching under his hand, yet his voice did not tremble in the slightest. It was still calm, even somewhat humble. And Lin couldn't bear to watch any longer and turned around. Linghai Zhuang, on the other hand, had an expression of appreciation, even a faint sigh of praise. The divine gate slowly closed. Just as it was about to close, Guan Feibai saw the Archbishop of Wenshui drag Taoist Whitestone into the forest, casually thrusting his sword a few times into Taoist Whitestone's body. It was a stab, not a stab, because a stab was a competition of swords, while a stab was a slaughter. The corners of Guan Feibai's eyes twitched. This time, it had nothing to do with personally witnessing a major event of the Orthodoxy. He knew that anyone who could be appointed bishop of Wenshui City by the Orthodoxy for so many years was assuredly no ordinary person. But he could never have imagined, and found it very difficult to accept, that this seemingly calm, modest, and noble bishop would, at certain moments, act like a madman. If the Orthodoxy had many people like this, no, even if there were only a few, it would be far too frightening. Taoist Whitestone was the Archbishop of the Hall of Literary Glory, a true prefect of the Orthodoxy. There is no question that he was also a very important person in Shang Xingzhou's grand scheme. Today he had died, just like that, in the Taoist Church of Wenshui City. The other side had been so greatly provoked that they would inevitably react, especially in Wenshui, the unfathomably deep Wenshui, the Tang clan's Wenshui. Taoist Whitestone's death had undoubtedly manifested the stance of the Orthodoxy and Qinchangshan. They were already prepared to completely fall out with the Tang clan. Everyone knew that the Wenshui Tang clan was the wealthiest clan on the continent, the head of the four great clans, but in reality, the Tang clan's hidden strength was far beyond anyone's imagination. The Tang clan's history was far too long. In the coup of the Mausoleum of Books 3 years ago, the Tang clan had played the most crucial role, but very few people knew about it. If the Tang clan had not found a way to break the imperial design, the Tian High Divine Empress might still be sitting on the imperial throne. Now, the secret strength of the Pavilion of Heavenly Secrets had been taken over by the Monastery of Eternal Spring in Luoyang, and the majority of the remaining properties belonged to the Tang clan. The Tang clan's strength was even more terrifying. A faction like the Tang clan was naturally an arm that everyone wanted to obtain, both the Orthodoxy and the imperial court. Logically speaking, even if the Tang clan had clearly become closer to the imperial court in the last few years, the Orthodoxy should not have displayed such an intense stance. It had to be said that the person writing the letter understood Chun Changshan very well. He or she knew that Chun Changshan was bound to bring Tang 36 out of that ancestral hall. Then no matter how gentle the Orthodoxy's attitude toward the Tang clan was, as long as this matter did not change, he would still have to fall out with the Tang clan. When I was writing about the Orthodox Academy, I mentioned Huang and's youth is all kinds of red right now. They're still youths, but they have to be a little more ruthless. Thank you, everyone, for your continued support. I hope that you will all support the Hall of Honor and the overall selection of works for the 515 Fan Festival. In addition, the Fan Festival also has a few red packets. Take a look and continue your subscription. Chapter 827. Since they were going to fall out sooner or later, why not face it with the toughest attitude from the beginning? If this was a game of chess, the Mount Song Army headquarters was just casually placing a piece, representing the Li Palace's re-establishment of its voice to the continent. The second move that landed in Wenshui City was the deciding move, the deciding move, the deciding move, the deciding move, the deciding move. The person who wrote the letter wanted to use Tang 36 incident to force Chun Sheng to put on the toughest attitude. This attitude was for the Tang clan to see, not for the Tang second master to see. Although the chief branch had lost its power, the Tang clan was still the Tang old master's Tang clan. The person who wrote the letter was gambling on what sort of decision the Tang old master would make in the face of the orthodoxy's most unyielding stance. The greatest problem was that the circumstances of the Tang clan over the past few years had proven that the Tang old master clearly supported the second branch. To put another way, he had already made his choice between Shang Xingzhou and Chun Changsheng, master and disciple. Moreover, how could a person like the Tang old master change his stance just because of the orthodoxy's unyielding stance? Before the Tang old master, the orthodoxy first had to confront the Tang second master. This middle-aged man, who was said to have taken complete control of the Tang family, was undoubtedly one of the most powerful men on the continent. But outside this quiet Taoist temple, he looked like an ordinary middle-aged man. Perhaps it was because the Archbishop of Wenshui was not as humble in front of him as he usually was, much less fawning. The bishop seemed to really treat him as an ordinary middle-aged believer who wanted to pay his respects to the Pope. In the early morning, the 3 prefects of the Orthodoxy and 100 cavalry entered Wenshui City. Not long after, many voices came from the Taoist hall. It was at this time that the Tang's second master came to the stone steps and expressed his desire to pay a visit to the Pope. The bishop helped to make the announcement, then said that His Holiness the Pope had just woken up and was in the middle of washing up, so he needed some time. This was a very normal matter. Although the Tang's second master knew that this was an excuse, he could only wait at the bottom of the stone steps. But he didn't expect that this wait would last for half a day. The morning light dispersed the fog in the forest and then turned into warm sunlight that was rarely seen in winter. As time passed, the 2 guardians standing behind the Tang's second master and his attendants grew uglier and uglier. The Pope had come to Wenshui, so the Tang clan naturally should have sent someone to meet him, but why did the second master have to wait for so long? Was this a show of strength to the Tang family? If not for the Tang's second master maintaining his silence, they might have already begun to quarrel. After all, this was Wenshui City. From a certain perspective, the head of the Tang clan was the true emperor. Whether it was Emperor Taizong or the infamous Tianhai Divine Empress, in this city, their decrees had never been as effective as a single word from the clan head. In their view, the second master represented the Tang clan. Even the Pope could not humiliate him like this. The Tang's second master had stood at the base of the stone steps with his hands held behind his back for half a day. Let alone anger, not even impatience had appeared on his face. But that didn't mean he was calm. In fact, he was in a terrible mood at the moment. In the coup of the Mausoleum of Books 3 years ago, he had played an extremely important role. The common people did not know, but those who had the right to know knew. From that moment on, he became an influential figure in the continent. Although he still had not become the master of Wenshui City, everyone knew that that day was not far away. Whether it was the family business or the internal affairs of the various branches, the old master had given him the responsibility to handle them. He was already the de facto master of Wenshui City. Especially after Tang 36 had been imprisoned in the ancestral hall half a year ago, no one dared to question this point, not even Shualao City. Even if he had gone to the capital to see His Majesty a month ago, he could have gone straight to the palace without needing to send a message. Now, who would dare to intentionally leave him hanging for so long? Not being able to kill you in the snowy mountains is truly a regrettable matter, and I even let you enter Wenshui. That idiot white stone. How did you get discovered? But even if you came to one Shui, other than throwing a tantrum like a child, what else could you do? His Holiness the Pope. Is he really that big? The Tang's second master gazed at the eaves of that Taoist church deep in the forest, his expression calm as he thought of a few treasonous words. When he thought of that last sentence, he found it very amusing. He was very humorous, and the corners of his lips perked up. In the past, the Archbishop of Wenshui at his side would assuredly have tactfully asked, why is second master smiling? But today was different. The Archbishop of Wenshui looked at him and seriously said, Sir Tang, please do not be impolite. The Tang's second master's smile suddenly vanished. He could no longer maintain his composure, a layer of frost appearing on his face. Just when all his patience was about to vanish, the announcement finally came from the Taoist church. The Tang's second master and the others ascended the stone steps, passing through the quiet and secluded winter forest and arriving outside the divine gate. Raising their eyes, they saw the pear tree. There was no figure under the pear tree, no snow on the ground, and no snow-like white flowers. The stone slabs had just been washed with water, so they were wet and clean. Perhaps there had been blood earlier? The clouds had filled the sky, and the warm winter sunlight had not vanished. It was still far from nightfall, but many lanterns had already been lit in the hall. Standing outside the divine gate and peering in, one would occasionally have the misconception that this place was a vast sea of stars. The Tang's second master walked into the divine gate. The two guardians and the Tang clan guards prepared to follow, but they were stopped. The Archbishop of Wenshui calmly said to the Tang clan, Please do not wander around the forest, or else you will also die. As they spoke, several dozen priests arrived at the riverbank in the rear garden. Two thick and heavy chains gradually emerged from the water, blocking the river. Because of a certain rule of the Tang clan, there were basically no boats on the Wenshui, but the Taoist church had still made complete preparations. The Tang's second master gazed at the sea of lights in the hall. After a moment of silence, he raised his hand to indicate that his followers should stop. Crossing the high threshold and arriving in front of the quiet hall, he saw Linghai Jiwang and Enlin. The two archbishops stood on the stone steps in front of the hall, looking like two statues of gods. The Tang's second master greeted them, then slowly opened his mouth. He was laughing, but there was no sound. This was his habitual expression. Sometimes it would be comical, sometimes abnormally terrifying, but no matter the time, it was always brimming with derision and malice towards the world. Linghai Jiwang expressionlessly looked at him like he was looking at an idiot, and Lin gave a slight nod in return, then paid him no more attention. The Tang's second master's smile gradually faded as he asked, To have two archbishops guard the gate, has any pope ever done this before? After saying this, he did not wait for an answer. With a light brush of his sleeve, he pushed open the door and walked in. Countless lanterns were lit in the hall, the light so bright that it fell on his face. He was rather similar to Tang 36. His face was handsome, but the space between his brows was even more indifferent. In the next moment, that indifference finally dissipated, transforming into an indescribable emotion. In the center of the Taoist church was a prayer mat. This was naturally for people to kneel on. Chapter 828. Only in the last 2 days did I notice that before and after the cheating update, a PS would be added. It seemed to be related to monthly votes and red packets. Let me tell everyone, this was automatically added by the system, not by me. Please feel free to vote. I wish everyone a happy day at work. Mua mua mua. The prayer mat was neither new nor old, neither thick nor thin. It was of the style commonly seen in Taoist churches or ancestral halls. The Tang's second master said nothing as he gazed at the prayer mat. When kneeling, it was more comfortable to have the prayer mat between the knees and the hard ground. The question was, who was he going to kneel to? Of course, the Pope. Countless lamps hung in the night sky like stars, a young man standing amidst them. The Tang's second master said nothing, nor did he hear anyone else. The silence in the hall continued. The Tang's second master's eyes gradually narrowed. He finally moved. He walked up to the prayer mat, raised the front of his robe with his hands, and slowly kneeled. His movements were very slow, very meticulous. From raising the front of his robe, to slightly bending his knees, to leaning forward, he had used a very long time. This was enough time for him to think about many things. He had heard that many years ago, the previous pope had also come to Wenshui. When had his father ever made such a grand bow? You and Tang Tang are of the same generation, so I am your senior. How can you accept my bow? Even if you don't call me second uncle, you should at least say no need for ceremony. This period of time had truly been very long, and to the Tang's second master, it had been even longer. It was enough time for him to think about so many things, and it was naturally enough time for the young man in the light to speak. But why had I still not heard your voice? He even wondered if he had heard incorrectly. Or was that person's voice too soft, too vague? No, the Taoist church was so quiet that even the softest voice could be heard clearly. For instance, at this very moment, his knees finally touched the prayer mat. The soft cushion gave off a light sound, but in his ears, it was like a clap of thunder, shaking his soul. The Tang's second master kneeled in front of Chun Changsheng. Even when the scene really happened, he still found it somewhat difficult to believe. He did not dare believe that Chen Changsheng really had not said that he was excused from ceremony. He did not dare believe that Chen Changsheng would so calmly accept his great bow. The sound of the knee meeting the praying mat disappeared. All the sounds in the hall disappeared. It was incomparably quiet. Only the light of the lamp could be heard swaying in the breeze. The Tang's second master kneeled on the prayer mat, his heart growing colder and colder, but his expression growing more and more indifferent. Then he stood up. When he knelt, he was like a jade mountain that was about to collapse. And when he stood up, he was like the rising sun rising from the water. Clean, efficient, and without any hesitation. He stood up by himself. It was obvious that this was a breach of etiquette in front of the emperor, but he was furious at the moment, so he decided to ignore it. He looked at Chun Changsheng and indifferently said, "Greetings, Your Holiness the Pope." It was not a greeting, just a passing acquaintance. It was still quiet in the Taoist hall. Countless lights swayed in the breeze, making a rustling sound, like the sea of pine trees in the mountains. Chun Changsheng quietly gazed at the Tang's second master for a very long time. This was the first time he had seen him. Whether it was the coup of the Mausoleum of Books or the assassination of Zhou Tong on the snowy street, he and the legendary Tang's second master had never met. The Tang's second master was very similar to Tang 36. His face was handsome, his temperament indifferent, and he exuded a noble aura, but there was a hint of gloominess on his face. When I see you, I very naturally think of him. Chen Changsheng continued, "It's already been a very long time since I've seen him. The more this is the case, the more I miss the time when he was at my side. At that time, he helped me with many things." The Tang's second master asked, such as? Chen Changsheng took a step forward, walking out of the shifting light to stand in front of the Tang's second master. Such as, right now, he will say to you, "Did I let you get up?" Just like that, you got up. As one of the rarest pope in history that had not stepped into the divine domain, no matter how talented Chen Changsheng was, his strength was still limited. The Tang's second master was well aware of this point, but when he saw this young man walking out of the sea of stars, saw his calm face, heard his words, he felt an indescribable pressure assailing him. It was like countless mountains, like the vast sea of stars had fallen into the Wenshui, stirring up countless waves in his mind. Only now did he realize that no matter what his strength was, Chen Changsheng was the pope, so he was facing a pope. This thought made him feel extremely uncomfortable, just like how Chen Changsheng had used Tang 36's tone to say those words. "Did I let you get up?" If Tang 36 were present today, he really would have said this, not giving him any face, perhaps even being even harsher. The Tang's second master narrowed his eyes once more. He naturally would not kneel again. He gave a mocking smile and said nothing. There are no ifs. Tang 36 is imprisoned in the ancestral hall, so he can't possibly appear at your side. I had someone prepare the prayer mat. Chen Changsheng glanced at the prayer mat on the ground, then raised his head to the Tang's second master and continued, because I hoped that you would also prepare a relatively soft prayer mat for him. He was imprisoned in the old estate for 2.5 years, and then imprisoned in the ancestral hall for half a year. Given his personality, he must have been punished to kneel for a very long time. Without a prayer mat, he will find it rather difficult to endure. The Tang's second master expressionlessly replied, "He is a descendant of my Tang clan, so he naturally has elders to take care of him. There is no need for your holiness to care." Chun Chongsheng replied, "He is my friend, so it's impossible for me not to care." At these words, the Tang's second master's brows rose. "Does your holiness only care about these minor matters?" Chun Chongsheng replied, "To me, this matter is very important." The Tang's second master harshly asked, "Is it even more important than the future of the Li Palace?" Chun Chongsheng replied, "I think that perhaps this is a misunderstanding between you and the Tang Old Master. My coming to Wenshui City has nothing to do with the Li Palace. I have only come for him." The Tang's second master mocked, "Is that so? Could it be that your holiness only wants to take him away and has no other request for my Tang clan?" Chun Chongsheng replied, "Precisely. Does your holiness think this matter is very funny? Or else why would you say such a joke?" The Tang's second master felt this to be utterly absurd, thinking, "Do you really think that by saying these words, you can convince the entire world that the orthodoxy has no designs on the Tang clan?" The more he thought, the more he found Chun Chongsheng's words and actions laughable, so he began to laugh. Normally, when describing laughter, one would add the words "ha-ha" or "raucous" in front, because laughter naturally had to have sound. But everyone knew that the Tang's second master's laughter had no sound, whether it was a slight smile or a great laugh. He only had his mouth open, making him seem like one of those mimes in Shualao City, acting out an absurd story, silently mocking others and the world. This was the first time Chun Chongsheng had seen the Tang second master's legendary silent smile. He did not find it comical, nor did he find it frightening. He only found it very ugly and very painful, like a fat goose waiting to be fed but having its neck tied to an iron chain. I miss that friend of mine even more. If he were here right now, he might say, "Are you mute? Or else why would you laugh so bitterly?" Chun Chongsheng said these words without the slightest hint of derision, only a faint yearning. Chapter 829. The Tang's second master's smile gradually faded. Looking at him, he asked, "Does your holiness truly wish to humiliate our Tang clan?" Chun Chongsheng stared at a place outside the palace and said, "I never wanted to humiliate anyone, but that guy would often misinterpret my words to satisfy his own bad taste. For example, right now, he would definitely say that the person I humiliated was you and had nothing to do with the Tang family, because what right do you have to represent the Tang family?" This was the most important sentence. Although Chun Chongsheng used Tang 36 name to say this, it was obviously what he wanted to say. The orthodoxy did not agree to the second branch inheriting the Tang clan, and did not even want to engage in any dialogue or negotiations with the second branch. It still firmly stood on the side of the chief branch. This was something that had been determined long ago. But before today, the Tang's second master could not help but imagine a few other possibilities. In a situation where the imperial court was clearly flourishing and the main branch of the Tang clan was clearly losing power, was it possible for the Li Palace to give up its original plan and attempt to rope in him, the true head of the Tang clan? If that really happened, the Tang family's position would be even more important, and they would be able to gain more benefits. Now Chun Chongsheng's words directly announced that this possibility did not exist. The Tang's second master was not very disappointed, but he once more felt that pressure. This meant that if he wanted to become the head of the Tang family, he first needed to pass through Chun Chongsheng. Although he was very confident and had the full support of the imperial court and Shang Xingzhou, this time his opponent was the entire orthodoxy. "I don't want to humiliate the Tang family. In fact, I don't want to humiliate you either. I just don't like that smile of yours." Chun Chongsheng's voice was still as calm as ever, just like his current expression. It might seem a little rude to say such things in person, but at least it was honest. Wangpa doesn't like to smile like this either. When he first saw me smile like this in the old mansion, he wanted to punch me in the face. The Tang's second master continued. But even today, even though he's already an expert of the divine domain, I still smile like this, and he still can't do anything to me. Your Holiness, if you really don't like my smile, then close your eyes or try to get used to it. Compared to Chun Changsheng's words, his attitude was even more rude and forceful. The meaning of this sentence was clear and simple. The Li Palace should not meddle in the affairs of the Tang clan, nor did it have the ability to meddle. So please pretend that you didn't know, or endure. Whether it was the main hall or the rear hall, the Taoist church of Wenshui was magnificent, comparable to the halls of the Li Palace. This was because over the countless years, the Tang clan of Wenshui City had contributed far too much wealth to the orthodoxy. Perhaps it was for this reason that the Tang family's guardians and attendants did not feel any awe when they looked at the Taoist temple. Instead, they felt a sense of pride, as if they were looking at their own property. The Tang's second master had already been in the rear hall for a very long time, but there was still no sound. The expressions of the two guardians gradually turned grim, while the attendants wanted nothing more than to charge in. If not for the fact that the two archbishops were standing guard outside the hall, if not for the Pope being within the hall, if it were any other day, the people from the Tang clan really would have done such a thing. The two worshippers looked at each other and saw the vigilance and uneasiness in each other's eyes. They sent a subtle message to the outside of the forest. There was no sound of wind breaking in the forest, but there were several faint aura fluctuations, which even the Taoist temple's tactical formation did not detect. The Archbishop of Wenshui had brought several dozen priests and even more cavalry to guard this place. In a certain tree deep in the forest, Zhishio hugged the demon commander's banner sword. His eyes closed as if he was resting, but his spiritual sense had always been following those qis. If the Tang clan really dared to risk universal condemnation and attack, the people brought by the two guardians would never be able to charge into the Taoist temple because Linghai Jiwang and Enlin were there. And the people hidden in the forest would probably be wiped out in a very short time. The Tang clan naturally would not make such a foolish move. Their true preparations were probably in another direction. The rear garden of the Taoist temple was on the shore of the Wenshui. On the opposite shore was a long embankment, and behind the embankment were restaurants and residences. Separated by 200 some zhang, two residences upstream and downstream had their doors tightly shut. The light inside was dim, and many people were concealed within. There were also several heavy metal chests. These chests were filled with mountain-cleaving axes. This sort of weapon, designed by the Tang clan, was often used on the battlefield to chop off the sharp and hard front claws of the wolf cavalry. Today, it was prepared to be used to chop off the two thick chains on the Wenshui River. Once the chains were broken, the Wenshui, which had been calm for many years, would be flooded with 10 some armored ships, each equipped with 10 some divine crossbows. The sewers leading to the Taoist temple were already covered in a black and viscous, oily substance, but it was hard to tell what it was used for. The setting sun shone on the restaurant, and the scenery on the second floor was even better, allowing one to see even further. Luo Bu sat by the railing, facing the setting sun as he drank wine, silently calculating how long the Tang's second master had been in the temple. The orthodoxy had many experts. Logically speaking, even if the Tang clan had prepared for a very long time, they should have been able to deal with them. The problem was that this was not the Tang clan's full strength. Luo Bu looked down the stairs. The setting sun hung over the Wenshui, the evening clouds retreating into the curtain of night. The trees on the shore seemed to turn into red maples. A blind zither player was playing the zither by the water. 7 peddlers, 6 government laborers, 3 fortune tellers, 2 sesame candy-selling elders, and a cosmetic-buying girl were on the street. It was just like yesterday. Luo Bu said nothing at this sight, thinking to himself, the Tang clan's strength truly is unfathomable. Will that fellow really run into trouble today? This being the case, why have you come to see me? Chen Changsheng asked the Tang's second master. The Tang's second master replied, this place is Wenshui City. As the host, I naturally have to come to give my greetings and see if there is anything lacking in my hospitality. This is etiquette. Chen Chongsheng was quiet for a while, then said, I understand. This was the meaning that he had finished his inspection and was sending the guest off. The Tang's second master naturally would not just leave like this. He still had not seen the person he wanted to see. Sir has a friend in Wenshui, and coincidentally, I also have a friend in the Li Palace. His name is Bai Shi. He said to Chen Chongsheng, I don't know where he is right now. It's rare for old friends to meet again, so I would like to invite him to drink a cup of wine. Chen Chongsheng replied, regretfully, he is unable to drink this cup of wine, because he is already dead. He was very calm, as if he was speaking of a very ordinary matter. The Tang's second master could no longer maintain his composure. His expression slowly changed, and then he once more noiselessly laughed. This time, there was an indiscernible meaning in his smile, and it was even colder. Then has your holiness ever thought that Sir's friend might also be dead? He stared into Chen Chongsheng's eyes. Chen Chongsheng was still very calm. No, because I'm still not dead. This was confidence. He was the Pope. As long as he was alive, who would dare to kill his friend? The Tang's second master stared into his eyes for a very long time, then suddenly said, Your Holiness the Pope might not know, but that big brother of mine is suffering from a serious illness that has lingered for more than 2 years. There is no cure for it, and he might die at any time. And this illness is highly likely to be hereditary. Chen Chongsheng asked, Then why did you not get the illness? So in my view, this illness cannot be hereditary. That friend of mine will not get sick. The Tang's second master's voice became even colder. Who can say for sure about something like illness? Chen Chongsheng stared into his eyes and enunciated each word. I can say for sure. If I forbid him from getting sick, he cannot get sick. Chapter 830. Suddenly, the wind stopped and clouds obscured the setting sun. Night seemed to come early, and the golden lines on the water gradually faded. In a very short time, the two shores of the Wenshui had become much colder. Whether it was those tightly shut residences or those two chains, they all exuded a dangerous aura. Luobu sat in a restaurant, listening to the zither player's zither music. He slowly closed his eyes, his right hand lightly stroking the hilt of his sword. Not even he had any confidence in the unfathomable strength of the Tang clan. In the past, he would at most think of a way to warn them, but now he wanted to try. This was because the sword he had used in the past was an ordinary steel sword forged from a few taels of silver from a smithy in the small town at the foot of the mountain. Now he had switched to a different sword. With the sword in hand, he could step on the frost grass and use it as a sword, transforming into a sword. Even when facing an expert of the divine domain, he could still maintain a bright Tao heart. He closed his eyes, listening to the zither music from below, listening to the sound of the water splashing against the rocks on the shore, listening to the sounds of the chains touching the water and then separating. He sensed everything in the world. Suddenly, his ears twitched. He opened his eyes and gazed into the river. His gaze grew deeper and deeper, ultimately resting on the watergrass. He felt that this patch of watergrass was rather strange. It was a deeper color than the grass around it, but he couldn't see anything else that was strange about it. At this moment, the blind zither player on the shore also seemed to hear something. He gazed into the Wenshui and forgot what he was doing. The zither music came to a screeching halt. The strange atmosphere on both sides of the river suddenly became a little different. The ironclad ships upstream and downstream silently retreated. The two residences became empty. The cheese in the forest vanished without a trace. The Tang clan guardians and attendants in front of the Taoist church became much quieter. Only 7 peddlers, 6 government laborers, 3 fortune tellers, 2 sesame candy-selling elders, and 1 cosmetic-buying girl remained on the street. It seemed like they would never leave. The door to the hall was pushed open and the Tang's second master walked out, his complexion extremely unsightly. He did not even glance at Linghai Jiwang or Enlin. Taoist Baishi's death meant that the orthodoxy's stance was abnormally firm and unchangeable. As they walked down the stone steps, Zheshio stood under a large tree. The Tang's second master knew what he wanted to say. With an indifferent expression, he said, It wasn't easy for you to live to this day, so don't casually speak. Jishio expressionlessly said, for a weakling like you to survive until today, it's even more difficult. The Tang's second master slowly raised his brows. His expression did not change, but he was inwardly furious. On that snowy street in the capital, Wang Pa had once said to him that the moment he gave up cultivation and began to study strategy and pursue power, he had become a weakling. Today, he was once again evaluated in such a way, and the other party was a junior. The angrier he was, the more indifferent he appeared. He looked at Jishio and asked, "Do you really want to die?" Jishio did not answer his question, saying, "Don't secretly attack that guy." The Tang's second master stared into his eyes and said, "In truth, I've never understood how a wolf cub like you could become friends with that wastrel. I'm not his friend." After a moment of silence, Jishio continued, "He is my employer, so don't touch him." The people of the Tang clan had all withdrawn. In the deep darkness, the two shores of the Wenshui were quiet. Chen Changsheng arrived on the shore, Linghai Zhuang and the others at his side. Nank had followed his orders and remained in the Taoist church. The starlight fell on the surface of the water, causing countless silver scales to appear. No matter how good one's eyesight was, it was still very difficult to clearly see what was going on at the bottom of the water, much less those aquatic plants in the depths. The Tang clan's first master, Tang 36's father, had always been in poor health, and it had only gotten worse in the last few years. This was a matter that many people of the continent knew of. No one, including Chen Changsheng, had ever doubted it. Not even Tang 36 had mentioned it in his previous letters. But after hearing the Tang second master's words today, he felt that something was wrong. Although it's still not clear what illness it is, it's confirmed that it's not poison. Archbishop Enlin added, "In the past, the 13 divisions of Radiant Green and South Stream Temple both sent people to take a look." The Archbishop of Wenshui glanced at Chen Changsheng's complexion and whispered, "Reporting to your holiness, before South Stream Temple closed, that person came." Closing the temple meant seclusion. In the last few years, Holy Maiden Peak had only had one seclusion that needed to be specifically mentioned, so the identity of that person he mentioned was naturally on the verge of being revealed. Enlin revealed an expression of shock. Linghai Zhuang slightly arched his brows, because the Li Palace had no idea of this matter. Chen Changsheng was even more shocked, thinking, "Why didn't she tell me?" The Archbishop of Wenshui whispered, "That person didn't let us say it. If the Tang clan's first master was not sick but poisoned, he should have been cured by the heavenly phoenix True Blood." Su Yurong had probably thought the same at the time. Now that the first master was still bedridden and on the verge of death, this meant that he truly was not poisoned, but sick. The Tang old master's change in attitude was probably directly related to this matter. Chen Changsheng knew why Su Yurong had come. She knew that Tang 36 was his best friend, and he was very grateful for this. After some thought, he decided to go to the first master tomorrow to take a look. It wasn't that he didn't trust the abilities of the 13 divisions of Radiant Green and Su Yurong, but he wanted to see if his medical skills could change that elder's sorrowful fate. Moreover, he had always felt that this matter was not so simple. After the Tang's second master's words, after he encountered that little monster in Hanshio City's Willow Lodge, go investigate a disciple of the longevity sect called Chusu. This person cultivates a very strange technique. No matter how well he hides it, someone should have heard of it. He separately ordered Linghai Zhuang and Enlin write a letter to urge South Stream Temple to see if they have any results on the matter. I had them investigate. Enlin did not know that he had written a letter to South Stream Temple, so she asked in confusion, "What matter is so urgent?" Chen Changsheng replied, "I want to know where the legacy of the Yellow Springs flow is, and if it might be in the south." Linghai Zhuang connected this to the strange technique that Chen Changsheng had mentioned to him, and his expression suddenly changed. Enlin's complexion also paled. She muttered, "Would the longevity sect dare to do such a crazy thing? I have no proof." Chen Changsheng fell quiet for a while, then turned to the Archbishop of Wenshui and said, "Find someone to investigate if the Tang clan has anything to do with this matter." Ling Hai Zhuang and the other two left with the order. Guan Feibai walked out of the Taoist church, sword in hand. He did not want to chat with Qin Changsheng, but he felt that Qin Changsheng needed someone at his side. As he gazed at the river under the starlight, Qin Changsheng fell into silent contemplation. He truly did not have any proof. The only clue was what the Demon Lord had said in the snowy mountains. The Demon Lord had said very clearly that the young array master was a little monster from the longevity sect called Chusu, and that this was the work of Shang Xingzhou and the Tang clan. That morning in the kitchen of Hanqiu City, he and Nank had encountered that monster of the Yellow Springs flow, covered in poison and terrifying to the extreme. At the time, he had not thought of it, and only later did he recall the Demon Lord's words and link these two matters together. The problem was that the Demon Lord's words could not be used as proof. Everyone knew that his words might have been used to sow discord. As Qin Changsheng pondered these questions, he had no idea that in the depths of the mercury-like river, a clump of watergrass was gently drifting. This clump of watergrass was a little different from the other watergrass around it. It suddenly floated away from the bottom of the river and slowly approached the rocks at the bottom of the riverbank. It looked like a clump of mud that had been melted by water and did not make any sound. Chapter 831. There were many crevices between the rocks on the shore, one of which was connected to the sewers beneath the Taoist church. During the day, the Tang clan had already sent people to destroy the array there and sprinkle a black, viscous, oily substance into it. The mud-like substance slowly flowed through the crevice into the sewers of the Taoist church and continued to move forward. Still, it made no sound, and its surface was made of some unknown substance that was not stained by the viscous black oil. Qin Changsheng's gaze fell on the opposite shore. He did not know that during the day, the opposite shore was very lively. There were many government laborers, peddlers, fortune-tellers, and a blind zither player playing the zither by the shore. The restaurant was very lively, and Luo Bu had drunk 2 jars of fine wine there. He did not notice that the ground behind him had slightly bulged and that 2 frost-colored weeds had already crossed the tops of his feet. The black soil silently blossomed like a flower, and an ugly hand covered in scales and hair reached out from the ground. An extremely minute change had occurred in the qi of the world. With Qin Changsheng's keen senses, he immediately sensed it. But his reaction was still a step too slow. He did not have time to use his fastest Yesher step or use the hanging evening clouds to send himself far away. That ugly and terrifying hand had already reached out from the ground and gripped his ankle tightly. An indescribable qi exuded from that hand, moving along his ankle and invading his body. Qin Changsheng felt like he had fallen into the mouth of a volcano and was enveloped in scorching lava. Every part of his skin was stinging and even somewhat numb. This was an illusion because that qi was not scorching but extremely cold. That extremely cold and filthy qi rushed into all his meridians and began to corrode his flesh and blood. Even more frightening was that the cold and filthy qi seemed to have a life of its own. It transformed into a film-like substance that enveloped all 365 qi openings in his body. This also meant that the star radiance in his qi openings would not be able to break out in a short period of time. In the next moment, that qi rushed into his abdomen and froze his ethereal palace into a snowy mountain. All of this happened in an extremely short period of time. The yellow leaves that fell from the tree were less than an inch away from the branches. The starlight didn't even have time to flicker. Qin Changsheng was restrained. Both his breathing and heartbeat seemed to be frozen. He couldn't even make a sound, let alone fight back. The underground attacker's methods were too sinister, and his aura was too cold and sinister. If it were any other cultivator, even a peak star condensation expert, in a situation where they were completely unprepared, suddenly encountering such a terrifying sneak attack, encountering such a sinister method that had not appeared in the world for countless years, there was a chance that something would happen to them, and then they would silently die. Would Qin Changsheng die just like that? Under the protection of countless experts, within the Taoist Church of the Orthodoxy, beneath the silver starlight? Guan Feibai held his sword and walked out of the Taoist temple. He was still 10 or so feet away from Chun Chong Sheng. Most importantly, other than feeling a slight chill in the night wind, he didn't notice any other problems. The Taoist temple's array formation did not detect the sneak attacker's arrival. Chun Chong Sheng's breathing slowed. Counting from the moment he was ambushed, the interval between his second breath was 7 times longer. At the same time, his heartbeat also slowed. Counting from the moment he was ambushed, his second heartbeat came many times later than the first. If this continued, perhaps his next breath would never come. Perhaps his heartbeat would stop, and then he would die. This was the closest Chun Chong Sheng had come to death, but it was not the closest. Ever since he was 10 years old, his life had always been accompanied by the shadow of death. Whether it was at the bottom of New North Bridge, by the lake of Mount Han, or at the peak of the Mausoleum of Books, he had encountered even more dangerous situations. Thus, even when he clearly saw the threat of death, he still did not panic. More importantly, he had many similar experiences, so he knew how to deal with cold and sinister qi. He had been blown by Gigi's dragon breath many times. In these past few years, he would sometimes become a snow sculpture at the bottom of a cave, and sometimes become a block of ice in the lake of the Cold Palace. The dragon breath of a black frost dragon was the coldest thing in the world. Although the qi of the ambusher was even more sinister and foul, it was still somewhat inferior in this aspect. From a certain perspective, Chun Chong Sheng was the person in the world who had fought against cold and sinister qi the most. Whether it was his mind or his body, his endurance far surpassed that of a normal person. Even those experts of the divine domain were not necessarily stronger than him in this aspect. In the view of the ambusher, Chun Chong Sheng's physical body and spiritual sense should have been completely frozen. Even his thoughts should have stopped, much less counterattack. Chun Chong Sheng truly could not move at this time, but he could still think. As long as he could think, no one could hold him. Just as his breathing and heartbeat slowed to a halt, he began to think. Countless swords streamed out of the vault sheath. Countless swift and fierce sword intents enveloped the back garden by the Wen Shui. Countless sword glows wildly slashed in every direction, shattering the starlight and cutting the grass. Countless deep sword slashes appeared on the ground, and the slightly hardened earth was thrown into the air. The array of the Taoist church was finally activated. A clear light emerged from the eaves of the hall and completely enveloped the Taoist church and the back garden. A groan could be faintly heard from the countless sword glows, and at the same time, there was a ripping sound as if something had snapped. The grass constantly bulged, as if something underground was trying to escape. That sinister and foul qi had lost its source, so Chun Chong Sheng was no longer in danger of losing his life. However, he could not move for the moment, so he was still in danger. The group of swords flew back and hovered around his body, forming an airtight sword formation that emitted a buzzing sound. As he watched Chun Chong Sheng standing by the water, Guan Fei Bai had already sensed something strange. The changes in Chun Chong Sheng's breathing rate and heartbeat could not be concealed from his brilliant sword heart. And then he saw the black earth on the grass and the hand that had strangely gripped Chun Chong Sheng's ankle. He unsheathed his sword and rushed over, but he was extremely nervous as he realized that he might not make it in time. Just at this moment, countless sword glows appeared on the grass, slashing apart the starlight and the grass, simultaneously forcing the ambusher to reveal himself. Seeing the bulge on the grass, Guan Fei Bai's sword left his hand and slashed down. A white sword glow appeared in the darkness by the Wen Shui. The starlight in the sky instantly dimmed, the frosted grass fell, and the yellow leaves shattered. Chapter 832. Guan Fei Bai's attack seemed very simple, but it was actually one of the most powerful sword techniques of the Mount Li sword style. When the sect master of the Mount Li sword sect, Su Li's master, saw Emperor Taizong's frost god spear in the Battle of Luoyang, he had comprehended a sword style. This sword was a sword of the battlefield. When it moved, it was like a spear that could pierce through the heavens, able to fight against 10,000 people. It was called the edge. It was not that the edge was completely revealed, but that the edge had to be revealed. If there was edge, It had to be seen by the world. Fierce winds howled, countless waves appeared on the surface of the river, and grass madly danced in the air. 2 years ago, Guan Feibai had succeeded in star condensation on the battlefield of the snowy plains, and now he was at the middle level of star condensation. Although he was a genius of the sword that everyone knew, he was still young. With his current cultivation, it was still not enough for him to use such a powerful secret sword of the sect. But he had used this sword without hesitation, completely disregarding the possibility that he would suffer a backlash from the sword intent, because he was currently very angry and also somewhat afraid. If Chun Changsheng had not had the protection of the 10,000 swords, would he not have died in front of him tonight? The cold winter night was sliced apart by an extremely swift and fierce sword intent that revealed its edge, as if a white rainbow had appeared. A heavy and violent boom came from the grass. Countless pieces of earth were thrown into the air, and a small and thin gray figure was jolted out. This person was hunched, very short, and dressed in black. It was the monster that Chun Changsheng had encountered in Hanqiu City. A clear and deep sword wound appeared on the monster's abdomen. 2 fingers on his left hand had been severed, probably by Chun Changsheng's sword. But whether it was the wound on his abdomen or the severed fingers, what flowed out was not blood, but a gray liquid. Seeing Guan Feibai, the monster let out a mournful howl. This howl was filled with pain, but also with a crazed impulse to kill. The moment the edge stabbed the monster, Guan Feibai's sword heart gave off a warning, as well as a clear feedback from his sword sense. The monster's skin and body were extremely tough, like it was covered in some sort of soft armor, but also like it was covered in countless grains of mud. It was extremely slippery and difficult to use. He had not hesitated to suffer the backlash of the sword intent to unleash his strongest sword strike, but he had only managed to leave a sword wound on this monster's body and was unable to severely injure it. Seeing the monster pouncing towards him, Guan Feibai's expression turned cold, but he showed no fear. His will to fight rose again. The long sword in his hand had already been shattered by the violent blow just now. Now, his hands were empty, but this did not mean that he had lost the ability to fight. How could the dignified divine kingdom's 7 laws lose to this big mouse-like ugly monster? An extremely sharp and formless aura appeared on his forearm, shattering the night wind upon contact. As expected of a genius of the Mount Li sword sect on the path of the sword, he had actually succeeded in cultivating the astral sword. That monster was used to a life that did not see the light of day. Normally, when he saw that his sneak attack on Chun Changsheng had failed, that the Taoist church array had appeared, and that the experts of the orthodoxy were assuredly on their way, he would definitely have turned and left without any reluctance. He would not have allowed himself to take any risks. But tonight he could not. He found it somewhat impossible to control his emotions. Previously, when he had been injured by the edge, he had begun to grow angry. When he realized that he had been injured by the Mount Li sword style, and that his opponent was a young disciple of the Mount Li sword sect, his anger burned even more fiercely. His eyes turned scarlet, and the brand in the deepest parts of his soul began to burn, so hot that only one thought remained in his mind. Su Li had to die. Everyone related to Su Li had to die, and all the people of the Mount Li sword sect had to die. In the howling winds, that monster flew through the night sky, bringing with it a foul qi and a terrifying pressure. Whether in Hanqiu City or the sneak attack just now, this monster had always attacked from the shadows and then attempted to flee. He had never revealed his full strength. Only now, when he was determined to kill Guan Feibai, did he reveal his true cultivation level. He was actually powerful to such a degree. Blood trickled down the corner of Guan Feibai's lips. This was the result of the backlash of his sword intent, and also the result of forcing himself to use the astral sword after being injured. Looking at the terrifying cold figure, he quickly determined that he was no match for it. But so what? At this moment, he stood in front of Chun Changsheng. As long as he stood here, the monster could not injure Chun Changsheng. As for himself, he believed that even if the monster wanted to defeat him, it would have to pay a sufficient price. Yes, As the most valiant and violent disciple of the Mount Lee sword sect, he had chosen his strongest attack for the first time. This time, he was prepared to choose his most ruthless attack. The final move of the Mount Lee sword sect's sword style. He was prepared to exchange life for life, to exchange injury for injury. He firmly believed that no matter how heavy his injuries were, the monster could not possibly leave unscathed, so he could forget about leaving tonight. Chun Changsheng had just shattered the ice that had frozen his body when he saw this scene. He yelled, "Don't!" He did not completely understand the monster's strength or methods, but he was keenly aware that the monster's entire body was covered in poison. If Guan Fei Bai wanted to exchange injury for injury, the result might not be as he imagined. He might even die. Qin Changsheng had woken up a little too late. He only had time to yell out, but he was unable to do anything. Guan Fei Bai's right hand slashed down like a sword. The sword aura cut through the wind without a sound. He didn't even look at the tentacle-like fingers of the monster. Both sides are going to be heavily injured, or even worse. Who could change all of this? A small figure broke through the window of the Taoist temple. At this moment, the small figure was still dozens of feet away from the battlefield. Logically, it was impossible for her to make it, but the speed of the figure had already surpassed the limits of logic. It was like a real bolt of lightning. That bolt of lightning strangely avoided the grass and dirt in the night wind and accurately struck the monster. To be more accurate, the small figure directly collided with the monster in the night sky. There was a muffled sound in the night sky. Grass and dirt flew again. The monster was directly smashed into the grass dozens of feet away. Who knew how many bones were broken? The small figure landed in front of Chun Changsheng and Guan Fei Bai. Her body swayed a little. It was Nank. The monster knew how terrifying Nank's speed was. It didn't dare to stay any longer. It turned around and burrowed into the grass. Nank knew that if she let the monster escape into the earth, it would be very difficult to catch it. She immediately prepared to give chase. But just when she was prepared to leap up, her body swayed again. It was obvious that she had suffered significant injuries from the previous collision. At this moment, another figure jumped down from the tall tree in the night sky. Zhishio had arrived. Seeing the scene before him, he didn't even think about anything, much less make any calculations. He just followed his usual style of battle and charged over. Like a meteor, he jumped down from the tree and charged at the hole that had just appeared in the grass. There was a massive boom. The earth trembled, the river roiled, and the grass, leaves, and dirt once more flew into the air, obscuring the starlight and casting the battlefield into darkness. The dust gradually settled, revealing the scene on the grass. A large hole had appeared in the ground. The hole was around a zhang deep, and one could faintly see the ripples of water at the bottom. Chapter 833. Zhishio gazed at the deep hole in the grass, seemingly lost in thought. Qin Changsheng, Nank, and Guan Fei Bai walked over. They saw a few pieces of gray flesh scattered across the grass. They looked very disgusting, presumably left behind by that monster. Such a large disturbance in the rear garden of the Taoist church naturally alarmed many people. Linghai Zhuang and Lin, and the Archbishop of Wenshui, who had been ordered to hurry over. No one spoke, only looked at Qin Changsheng. Qin Changsheng said, "If my guess is correct, this monster is the Chusu that I had all of you investigate." Linghai Zhuang asked, "The longevity sect?" Qin Changsheng fell quiet for a while, then said, "I suspect that this is the result of the previous longevity sect master's corpse beheading before his death." Linghai Zhuang and the others were extremely knowledgeable, so when they heard the word corpse beheading and associated it with the sinister Taoist technique Qin Changsheng had mentioned, their expressions flickered. Guan Fei Bai was more concerned about another problem. He asked Qin Changsheng, "Chusu? What two words are they?" Qin Changsheng replied, "It should be the two words you're thinking of." When he had first heard the name Chusu, Guan Fei Bai had found it rather strange, feeling a chill for some reason. Now, he finally understood the reason. He harshly said, "It turns out that even today, the longevity sect still has not forgotten the grudge for back then. Just this monster wants to deal with Marshal Granduncle?" Zhishio replied, "This monster has a very powerful cultivation, a pure Taoist technique, and an evil qi. Most troublesome of all is its sinister venom and speed. It also has the ability to tunnel through the earth. It can appear near us at any time and be used for sneak attacks and assassinations. It's extremely frightening. He was the most frightening concealer and assassin of the snowy plains. Now, even he had to admit that this monster was very dangerous. These words plunged the surroundings into silence. The Taoist church was protected by an array, and Guan Fei Bai was at its side, but that monster had actually been able to silently approach Chun Chongsheng and launch a sinister sneak attack. Even more frightening was that even after the powerful attacks of Guan Fei Bai, Nank, and Zhixiu, the monster had only been injured, not killed on the spot. It had to be known that although these three were not very old, they were definitely the most valiant existences of the younger generation of cultivators. This monster was naturally far from being enough to deal with Su Li. But if it were hidden near them and prepared to strike at any moment, it would truly be very difficult to guard against. Everyone, be more careful in the future. Qin Changsheng turned to Guan Fei Bai and said, especially you. In the future, when you encounter Chu Su, don't lightly use those killing moves that trade wound for wound. Although I've never encountered him, I can sense that the sinister poison in his body is very troublesome. Even I might not be able to cure it. This was referring to when Guan Fei Bai had been prepared to use the final move of the Mount Li sword style to clash with his opponent. I'll be more careful in the future. What about you? Guan Fei Bai looked at Chun Chongsheng's ankle. Chun Chongsheng said, I'm fine. There were still some black flocks on his ankles, but they had long since withered and disappeared without a trace when the night wind blew. Guan Fei Bai then looked at Nank. He thought to himself, you directly bumped into that monster just now. Aren't you worried about being poisoned? Then he remembered her true identity and realized that he had been thinking too much. The bloodline of the surpassing bird was the most poisonous thing in the world, so why would it be afraid of other poisons? Linghai Zhuang suddenly looked at Chun Chongsheng and sternly said, I ask your holiness to be even more cautious in your actions. You cannot act like before. Previously, Chun Chongsheng had sent them off on a mission, but he had not had Nank get close to protect him. He had been standing alone by the river in quiet contemplation. In his view, this was extremely unwise and also irresponsible to the millions of believers of the orthodoxy. Chun Chongsheng understood that he had good intentions and said, there's no need to worry. My injuries have not completely healed, so my chi senses are a little slow, allowing it to take advantage of me. It won't happen again. After saying this, he turned to the other shore. Even though such a large disturbance had occurred in the Taoist church, the other shore was still quiet. Not a single person had appeared. Only the barking of dogs could be heard in the distance. The shadows of the buildings along the river fell on the street and on the water, hiding something. Perhaps because the wine of Wenshui City was too authentic, or perhaps because the setting sun had warmed him too much and made him lazy, Audiobook did not leave after drinking in the restaurant. He went straight to the inn behind the restaurant and slept until late at night. Then, for some reason, he woke up. He walked into the shadows of the alley to the side of the restaurant and gazed at the nearby river, wanting to confirm that the feeling of the day was not an illusion. He did not see that clump of watergrass, because at that time, that clump of watergrass had already approached the other shore and entered the ground of the Taoist church through the cracks in the rocks. He had seen everything that had happened afterwards. That monster truly was rather unexpectedly savage and frightening. Even he had subconsciously gripped the hilt of his sword. He had not attacked at the start because he was very curious about Chun Chongsheng's true level. He had not expected to see his junior brother. He still did not attack because he trusted in his junior brother. Of course, this was also because he was confident that he could control the entire situation. Under the starlight, the Wenshui was like a silver belt spread out very wide. If Chun Chongsheng or his junior brother really did encounter a danger they could not resolve, his sword would naturally go over, disregarding the width of the river. He had not expected what happened next. Chun Chongsheng and his junior brother had not been able to capture or kill that monster that had ambushed them. That monster could travel through the earth, and with such astonishing speed, it had instantly vanished into the depths of the Wenshui. All these things that he had not expected had ultimately become reasons that made him feel helpless. He had just been unable to sleep in the middle of the night, so he had gotten up to relieve his boredom, and then he was prepared to go back and have a good sleep. But in the end, he just had to witness such a spectacle, and he was the only one who had seen the monster's final destination. Thus, he could only follow. The monster was at the bottom of the water, using the mud and sand as a cover to silently advance, but its speed was still very fast. Luobu leapt between the houses on the street, using the shadows of the eaves and the occasional drifting clouds to conceal his figure. He was similarly silent and very fast. In the end, he still could not catch up to the monster. He could only watch as the Wenshui lightly rippled, turn into a channel to the right, and vanish into an estate. He took out a charcoal pencil and paper and drew the last scene he had seen. The starry sky above the estate and the countless lights within it were all very real. This estate was truly very large. The buildings inside looked very ordinary on the outside, but they could not conceal their noble aura. Then he noticed that he was outside the side gate of another estate. The two estates faced each other across the river, both lit with countless lights. Even in the depths of the night, they still did not seem deserted. He walked into the estate. Perhaps it was because the master of this estate was on the verge of death from his illness, and the young master was imprisoned in the ancestral hall. So the people's hearts were scattered, and the security was not very tight. In particular, the houses and small courtyards on the outskirts would occasionally be noisy with the voices of people. In contrast, the magnificent courtyard in the center was much more serene and quiet. In that magnificent courtyard, he saw an elderly, loyal servant, his face covered in worry, and a sorrowful maid. Then, he heard the sounds of quarreling coming from the corner gate. "Clear your heads. The first master is already about to die. So who dares to fight with the second master? The Pope? This is the Wenshui Tangs. There's no need to give face to anyone. Don't think that just because the Pope is here that the chief branch has a backer, or else why would that wastrel still be kneeling in the ancestral hall?" Chapter 834. Luobu quietly listened for a while. This sort of story of a fierce slave deceiving his master was very common in all clans. The dog madly barked at its master, its voice getting louder and louder. Perhaps it was because it had gone mad, but it was more likely that it wanted to rely on its new master. To prove its loyalty to its new master, these dogs did not mind madly barking at their former master, even fiercely biting him a few times. He ignored the stewards at the corner gate, their bodies reeking of alcohol, and floated down to the window of the main room. Even though it was late at night, the room was still brightly lit. Perhaps it was because the master of the room had slept for too long and was about to fall into a long slumber, so he did not want to sleep. The shellfish oil produced in Zhuozhou did not give off any smoke, so it would not stain the eyes. The light was also very beautiful, painting the middle-aged man's face gold. The middle-aged man was very thin, his eyes sunken in, and his face covered in gold. He did not seem like a living person, but some sort of sacrificial offering. Luobu stood outside the window, calmly gazing at the middle-aged man on the bed. The finger gripping the hilt of his sword silently tapped, faster and faster until it was almost impossible to see. If the disciples of South Stream Temple saw this sight, they might be able to associate it with the Holy Maiden's movements when she used the Fated Star Plate to calculate. Yes, he was also calculating, but he was not using the Fated Star Plate, but a sword. In the end, he had not been able to find anything strange in this courtyard, nor had he been able to calculate any problems. It truly did not seem like he had been poisoned. If it really was an illness, not even his junior sister could cure it, so it was naturally even more impossible for him to cure it. Luobu regretfully and apologetically left the estate and returned to the shore of the Wenshui. As he gazed at the estate on the other side of the river, he silently thought, since this is the chief branch, then the other side is the second branch? On the first day of the Pope's visit to Wenshui, he refined a bottle of cinnabar pills. On the second day, the orthodoxy prefect Daoist Baishur who had accompanied him disappeared. The Pope received the Tang's second master, and in the middle of the night, he suffered an assassination attempt. On the third day, he brought many people out of the Taoist church. The divine carriage followed the one shui, and, under the uneasy gazes of countless people, arrived outside an estate. This estate belonged to the chief branch of the Tang clan. It had been half a year since the gravely ill Tang first master had moved back from the old estate. Half a year ago was also the day that Tang 36 was imprisoned in the ancestral hall. It was unknown if these two events were related. A few days ago, the gate to the estate would have been tightly shut, the servants scattered about, gossiping about their master. But today was different. When the Pope's divine carriage was still several li away, the estate received the news. After the initial panic, everything returned to normal. The middle door had long since been opened. The stewards and servants were kneeling on both sides, extremely respectful and silent. The rules of aristocratic families could be seen everywhere. But Chen Changsheng still felt that something was wrong. It wasn't because someone was looking at them from under the willow tree on the other side of the river, but because the smell in the air wasn't right. Nank followed by his side and sniffed like a little dog. She said, "There's dust." The steward, who had just rushed over from the Tang family's old residence, didn't have time to say anything when he heard these words. His expression couldn't help but change slightly. Chen Changsheng looked at the straight path made of white marble under his feet. Looking at the remaining wet marks, he knew that it had just been cleaned. The reason why they had just cleaned up was naturally to welcome his arrival, but it could also be inferred that they usually did not clean up diligently. Chen Changsheng said nothing and walked into the estate. Upon entering the magnificent courtyard, he saw a woman dressed in simple and yet still exuding a noble aura. From her appearance, he could tell that she was Tang 36's mother. Seeing the crowd enter the courtyard, especially the young man in the very center, the woman said in a trembling voice, "Believer Lin Xian pays respects to His Holiness the Pope." After saying this, she prostrated to Chen Changsheng. Chen Changsheng would never accept this bow. "Madam Tang, please rise." Madam Tang naturally would not stand up and continued to kneel. Fortunately, Chen Changsheng had predicted that this would happen and had already made arrangements. A cool breeze suddenly blew through the courtyard. Before anyone could clearly see anything, they only saw the girl at the Pope's side appear at Madame Tang's side. Nank supported Madame Tang's hand, so Madame Tang naturally could no longer kneel. At this sight, the steward of the Tang clan's old residence did not change his expression, but he felt a little uneasy. Many people knew that yesterday the Tang's second master had paid a visit to the Taoist church, and the Pope had accepted his kowtow. Anyone could imagine that the Pope's attitude towards the chief branch and the second branch would be different, but for him to express it so bluntly, just what sort of reasoning was there? Chen Changsheng did not accept Madame Tang's bow, but instead greeted her as a junior. Only now did Madame Tang realize that the rumors were all true, and that the letter sent back by the Orthodox Academy was also true. The Pope and her son were truly very close, even as close as brothers. "I want to see Uncle," Chen Changsheng said. Madame Tang had no reason to refuse, so she prepared to lead the way. Suddenly, there was a coughing sound. The steward of the Tang clan's old residence coughed twice. He first glanced at Madame Tang, then at Chen Changsheng. With a humble expression, he said, "The first master's illness is severe. Your Holiness's sacred body is of utmost importance. If there is anything inappropriate, it truly is the sin of my Tang clan. Your Holiness, please." He did not finish, but his meaning was clear. The Tang clan did not wish for Chen Changsheng to see the first master. Chen Changsheng had seen this steward of the old estate before. Many years ago, the yellow paper umbrella had been given to him by this steward. At their reunion today, the steward's attitude was still respectful, even more so than in the past, but there was a faint sense of wariness within. Chen Changsheng said nothing, only calmly looked at him. The steward suddenly felt the pressure on him increase, but he still forced himself to say, "The teachers of the 13 divisions of Radiant Green have come to see, and even that person from Holy Maiden Peak has come to see, but none of them have been able to do anything." Why must your holiness stir up sorrow? Madame Tang glanced at the steward. She did not refute him, but her sleeve began to tremble. Chun Chong Sheng suddenly asked, "Did the venerable master of the Tao come to see?" The steward thought he had heard incorrectly. In a daze, he didn't know what to say. He thought, with the venerable master of the Tao's status, why would he leave the capital to come to Wenshui to treat the first master? Chun Chong Sheng asked again, "Then did His Majesty the Emperor come?" The steward was even more confused. He thought, His Majesty the Emperor has a myriad of affairs to attend to every day, so why would he come? In the world, only their medical skills are better than mine. Since they didn't come, who has more right than me to say whether this illness can be cured or not? After saying this, Chun Chong Sheng followed Madame Tang into the inner estate, no longer paying any attention to the steward. Linghai Zhuang and several dozen priests remained behind, blocking the Tang clan's people outside. The steward wanted to rely on his status to enter, but he failed. Linghai Zhuang expressionlessly stared at him and said, "You like coughing? Continue." The steward of the old estate had an extremely high status in Wenshui City, but what could he do to a prefect of the orthodoxy? As he watched Chun Chong Sheng's figure disappear into the corridors of the inner estate, he was both anxious and angry, and actually began to cough. Chapter 835. Chun Chongxing knew that the teachers of the 13 divisions of Radiant Green and Su Yurong had both come to Wenshui to personally treat the chief branch first master, but he still decided to personally take a look. Just as he had said to the steward of the old estate, he had absolute confidence in his medical skills. Even if everyone concluded that the chief branch first master had not been poisoned, but was suffering from an incurable disease, he still had to personally see it to believe. He gazed at the unconscious middle-aged man. He wanted to find some trace of Tang 36 on his face, but he realized that it was rather difficult. Perhaps it was because he was too thin, or perhaps it was because his face was covered in gold. He sat on the bed and began to take his pulse. After a quarter of an hour, he took out a golden needle and inserted it into the man's meridians, beginning to make even more detailed observations. This time he took a rather long time. Even when the winter sun was at its zenith, his fingers were still gripping the end of the golden needle, trembling rhythmically. The door to the room was tightly shut, cutting off all sight from the outside. No one knew what was going on inside. Nang stood in front of the door, her face expressionless and motionless. Whether it was the embroidered stool that Madame Tang personally brought over or the precious tea that the maid offered with both hands, she did not even glance at them, much less speak. At the very beginning, when they saw the Pope enter the first master's room, the people of the chief branch could not help but reveal expressions of joy. In their view, since the Pope could refine the cinnabar pill that could revive the dead, his medical skills were assuredly superb. Even if the sacred light technique could not save the first master, feeding the first master a cinnabar pill was enough. But as time passed, the people gradually grew anxious. Some of the bolder maids wanted to sneak a peek, but they were frightened back by Nang's gaze. After an unknown amount of time, the tightly shut door finally opened, and Chun Chong Sheng walked out from within. Madame Tang went up to greet him. She had been very calm the entire time, but now she could no longer suppress her emotions. Her face was both nervous and hopeful. Seeing Madame Tang's expression, Chun Chongxing took back what he wanted to say. After such a long time of probing with the golden needle, he had a very comprehensive understanding of the Tang first master's condition. But the more he understood, the stranger he found it. There was indeed no poison left in the Tang family first master's body, nor were there any symptoms of being poisoned. It was just that his meridians were gradually withering and his vitality was constantly fading. The problem was that he could not find the cause of the illness. Naturally, there was nothing he could do about it. Furthermore, there was something strange. In the depths of Father Tang's liver meridian, he could faintly sense a cold aura. However, the aura was very faint and he could not trace its source. It could be an old illness from many years ago, or it could be, has Master Tang ever injured his waist before? He asked Mrs. Tang. Mrs. Tang seriously recalled and shook her head. I've been injured many times, but I've never hurt my waist. Qin Chongqing suddenly noticed the puzzled expression on Nank's face and asked, "What's wrong?" Nank looked at him and said, "I think I smell something." Qin Chongqing thought to himself, could it really be so? He turned around and led her into the room, saying, "Smell it carefully." Nank sniffed the air like a puppy and moved her feet, getting closer and closer to the bed. Finally, she stopped at the bedside, looked at Qin Chongqing, and nodded. Qin Chongqing understood her meaning. Madame Tang was extremely intelligent. Although she did not understand Nank's specific meaning, she understood. Her face instantly paled and her body swayed. Qin Chongqing looked at her and shook his head. A determined expression appeared on Madame Tang's face. She steadied her mind and steadied her body. At this moment, the sound of wailing suddenly came from outside the door. It sounded like the voices of men and women, old and young. The heavens have opened their eyes. Master, you can finally be saved. His Holiness, the Pope's benevolence, is as benevolent as the heavens. I, Husan, am willing to work like an ox or a horse for His Holiness. Master, hurry up and wake up. Hearing these voices, the maids of the inner residence revealed expressions of disdain. The housekeepers were even more enraged. If not for the fact that the Pope was present, they would probably have cursed out loud. They hatefully said, "These shameless people aren't really concerned about the Master. They're just afraid that the Master will be saved by His Holiness and then deal with them." Qin Chongqing had grown up in a Taoist temple, so he had never seen the dangers of a noble clan's old estate. He couldn't help but stare blankly. In this half-year, Tang has been praying for Father in the ancestral hall, and I was also in a rush to treat the Master's illness. It was unavoidable that I neglected the servants and disturbed His Holiness. "This is truly disrespectful," Madame Tang said apologetically, and invited him to the study in the next room to rest. The study was very quiet. The distant and emotionless wailing could not be heard. Besides Madame Tang and him, only Nank followed him in. Without outsiders present, Madame Tang finally revealed her true emotions. Her eyes slightly red, she said, "I thank His Holiness for His benevolence, and I ask that Your Holiness save the Master's life. The Tang clan's property can be given to the second branch. I only hope that the Master can live and that Tang can be released." Qin Chongqing replied, "Be at ease. Everything is for the safety of the Master and Tang. Madame Tang looked into his eyes and confirmed that he was speaking the truth. Only then did she truly relax. "Today, perhaps I will have to borrow His Holiness's divine might like the sea." Qin Chongqing understood her meaning and said, "Madam, please feel free to use it." By the time he returned to the Taoist church, it was almost dusk. The setting sun shone on the Wenshui River, and Qin Chongqing once more went to the shore. The grass in the back garden had already been repaired, leaving no trace of last night's assassination attempt. Archbishop Enlin, Guan Fei Bai, and the others followed closely at his side, unwilling to see a repeat of last night's situation. In a short while, Linghai Jiwang returned, bringing with him the latest news. Madame Tang, in the name of offending the Pope, had 3 second-class stewards and 10-some servants beaten to death, and 7 or 8 maids driven away. During the execution, Linghai Jiwang had stood on the side and said nothing, so no one dared to speak. The steward of the Tang clan's old estate had an extremely nasty expression, but in the end, he still maintained his silence. After hearing what had happened in the Tang clan's main branch, Guan Fei Bai felt very depressed. Just like Go Hanshi and the majority of the Mount Li Sword sect disciples, he had come from a poor background. Other than his eldest brother, he had a natural aversion to all the descendants of the great clans. Thus, at the Ivy Festival in the capital, he had disliked Tang 36's conduct. He had not imagined that the poor had their own hardships, and the great clans also had their own hardships. Moreover, it was even darker, and the relationship between family members was even more cruel and merciless. If the Tang First Master really did die of illness, and Tang 36 was imprisoned in the ancestral hall, just how difficult would Madame Tang's widowed life be? "I have to think of a way to get that fellow out as quickly as possible," he said to Chen Changsheng. Chen Changsheng thought a little more. Besides rescuing Tang 36 from the ancestral hall, he also had some progress on the Tang First Master's illness. But to resolve these two matters, he still needed to see the Tang clan's attitude. He said to the Archbishop of Wenshui, "Make arrangements. I want to see the Tang Old Master tomorrow." Chapter 836. P.S. Today's update, as well as polling and votes for the starting point 515 Fan Festival. Each person has 8 votes, and each vote will also give some coins. I beg for everyone's support and praise. Just like how the Tianhai clan could never represent the Tianhai Divine Empress, in Chen Changsheng's view, the Tang Second Master naturally could not represent the Tang clan. If he wanted to understand the Tang clan's stance, he had to personally meet with the Tang Old Master. The bishop showed a rare expression of difficulty. Logically speaking, he truly should have come to visit Sir, but the Tang Old Master never sees guests unless he wants to see someone. Back then, the Divine Empress sent MOU to Wenshui to personally summon him to the capital, but the Old Master didn't even accept the decree. Chen Changsheng replied, "You misunderstand. I said that I would go to the old estate tomorrow to visit the Tang Old Master." The bishop was very shocked, thinking to himself, "You are the Pope. Even if you consider yourself a junior from the Tang clan's young master, there's no reason for you to go to the old estate. Isn't this a loss of status?" Ling Haizhuang's complexion was rather unsightly as he prepared to speak. Chen Changsheng did not give him a chance. "Pass on a message. I'll wait for a reply." Only now did the crowd vaguely understand that the Pope wanted to use this matter to determine something. The bishop left to carry out the order. It didn't take long for the Tang clan's old estate to reply. Just as everyone expected, the Tang Old Master did not agree. The old estate gave the reason: a cold. Everyone knew that an important figure like the Tang Old Master could not possibly catch a cold. This was naturally an excuse. Of course, the Tang clan's old estate giving this excuse was already giving the Pope a great deal of face. If it were anyone else, even an important figure like Wu Qiongbai or the Prince of Xiang, the Tang Old Master would not see them if he said so. There was no need for a reason. But Chen Changsheng did not believe that the Tang Old Master was giving him face. He quietly pondered by the river for a very long time, and then he smiled. The sunset painted the sky, illuminating his still young face. His smile was very clean and delightful. He was truly in a very good mood. At Sloping Cliff Horse Farm, he had decided to come to Wenshui. From that day onwards, he had been worried about one thing. He was worried that the Tang Old Master had already made up his mind, worried that the Tang Second Master's actions were the collective will of the Tang clan. Now, it seemed that he did not need to worry about this matter, because the Tang Old Master did not dare to see him. Back in the Orthodox Academy, Chen Changsheng had said this to eunuch Lin and later to his martial uncle the Pope, that his master, Shang Xingzhou, did not dare to meet him. When he said he didn't dare, he didn't mean that his master was afraid of him or was afraid to face him. Instead, it meant that Shang Xingzhou didn't want to see him, and thus had to face some problems that he didn't want to face. Today, he believed that the Tang Old Master did not dare to meet him for a similar reason. This did not mean that the Tang Old Master did not dare to face him, but that the Tang Old Master did not want to face a few of his questions, was not willing to be convinced by him. This also meant that the Tang Old Master was well aware that there was a chance that he could be convinced by Chen Changsheng. "Get ready. Tomorrow, you will come with me to the old house." Chen Changsheng looked at the crowd and then said to Guan Fei Bai, "You are injured, so stay in the hall." Everyone was confused. Didn't the Tang family's old residents already reject his request? If the old master didn't want to see him, could it be that he was going to force his way in? The old master has caught a cold, so it is inconvenient for him to receive guests. Even if I am the Pope, it is still inconvenient. Chen Changsheng said, "But I happen to be a doctor too." Not even the Pope could force his way into the Tang family's old residence. Now that he had the identity of a doctor, would it make any difference? Even if this doctor was most skilled in treating colds, so what? In the end, it was still necessary to inform the Tang family first. On the same night, The Taoist church sent word to the Tang family's old residents that the Pope was preparing to visit the Tang Old Master tomorrow. It also clearly stated that the Pope was extremely concerned about the Old Master's health. On the morning of the next day, Chen Chongqing's group left the Taoist church under the escort of the Orthodoxy cavalry and priests. Even when the Pope's divine carriage appeared on the straight street of Wenshui City, the Tang family's old residents still had not received any confirmation. Chen Chongqing did not wait any longer, ordering the carriage to continue forward. Yesterday, he had gone to the estate to visit the first master of the Tang family's chief branch, and today, he was going to the old residence to visit and treat the old master. He had brought with him countless precious medicines prepared by the Orthodoxy, and he had also brought with him countless goodwill. Would the Tang clan become so angry that they would seal off the road to the old residence? Such an unreasonable action was not something that a clan of thousands of generations could do. No matter how many people in the Tang clan did not want him to go to the old residence, did not want him to meet with the Tang old master, they could only watch as the Pope's divine carriage slowly made its way down the long street, past the black-eaved and white-walled ancestral hall, getting closer and closer to the old residence. The gate of the Tang clan's ancestral hall was tightly shut. What was that fellow locked inside doing? Chen Chongqing did not glance at the gate of the ancestral hall, but he was naturally thinking about these things. Then he remembered that it was still early. Given that fellow's lazy personality, he was probably still sleeping and had no idea that he and Jushio were just passing by his gate. When they arrived at the Tang clan's old residence, would they also only see the tightly shut gate? This was what Linghai Zhuang and the others were most worried about, and it seemed highly likely that this would happen. Chen Chongqing was not worried about being refused entrance. No one could understand why he was so confident when the Tang Old Master was unwilling to see him. Presumably, the Tang Old Master would also be very curious after receiving the news. The Tang clan's old residence was located in the southernmost part of Wenshui City. It was very far from the Taoist church and required a very long walk. The city gate had long ago been closed. To be more precise, after the city gate closed last night, it had not been opened again, even though that time had long passed. Other than the Orthodoxy's carriage and cavalry, no one else could be seen on the street. The Tang clan had not sent a steward, not even a guide. The long street was quiet. The only sounds audible were the unhurried hooves of war horses and the crunching of wheels over stone. A gust of wind blew over from the river behind the street, blowing out an old piece of paper. This paper was covered in congealed oil, so it was probably used to wrap meat. A black dog ran out from a side alley and sniffed at the paper. Uninterested, it turned and left. Chen Chongqing noticed that the black dog was already old, but its fur was still glossy. It had been raised extremely well, and there was a collar around its neck. It was clearly domesticated. I've never seen a wild dog in Wenshui City. When he thought of this, he found it rather strange. Logically speaking, in a place as prosperous as Wenshui City, wild dogs should have lived very comfortably. Could it be that because of his arrival, all the wild dogs in Wenshui City had been driven away? Linghai Zhuang recalled the same question he had asked when he first came to Wenshui City many years ago and said, "There are no wild dogs here." Chen Chongqing asked why. Linghai Zhuang explained, "Perhaps they were taken in to be raised, perhaps killed, perhaps eaten. In short, there are no wild dogs." These words sounded very plain, but they also seemed to conceal many deeper meanings, inexplicably making the listener feel somewhat cold. Chen Chongqing thought to himself, from a certain perspective, the Tang Old Master and his master Shang Xingzhou are truly two very similar people. That generation was very similar. Yes, 3 years ago, the Elder of Heavenly Secrets had died, the Pope had died, and this year, the Demon Lord had finally died. Other than the wandering Wang Jitsa, that generation only had Shang Xingzhou and the Tang Old Master. What generation was that? It was the generation that had experienced the scorched earth, the destitution of the people, the invasion of the demons, the siege of Luoyang, the life and death of a few days away. It was precisely because they had experienced so much pain and tragedy endured a pressure unimaginable to modern humans, that these people had incomparably firm wills. They were like a rock at the summit of a lonely mountain, like a pine tree growing out of a rock. No matter how miserable or despairing the situation was, they would never give up. They would still calmly face it, always embracing their ideals. It was also because they had experienced too much, seen too much cruel and dark history, that they had unsurprisingly become the staunchest realists, the most callous strategists. Sinister methods, broad minds, and lofty goals coexisted in harmony with each other in their aging bodies, not conflicting at all. In the end, they became the most revered elders in the world, those who needed to be revered, those who made all living things fear. The Tang Old Master that Chen Changsheng wanted to meet today was this sort of person. The Tang clan's old estate was in the southern part of the city. Contrary to what the common people imagined, the old estate was not very large, far smaller than the two estates of the main branch and second branch. Moreover, it was not by the Wenshui, built against a rather low hill. It seemed rather ordinary, with nothing extraordinary about it. Chen Changsheng's group had not seen a single person on their journey from the Taoist church, but now they finally saw a person. The steward of the old estate that they had met yesterday in the estate was standing on the side of the street with a humble expression. Behind him stood an old man. This old man's eyes were indifferent, like the autumn sky. His expression was apathetic, his qi restrained. Gazing at the old man, a smear of blood suddenly appeared in the depths of Zheshio's eyes. Nang's hand released Chen Changsheng's sleeve. As the two people with the sharpest senses for danger, Zheshio and Nang immediately sensed how terrifying this old man was. Linghai Jiwang's expression turned abnormally solemn as he sternly said, "Half a step from the divine." If not for the portrait in the Moss Institute, he would have even believed that this old man was the Tang Old Master that the Pope wanted to meet. This old man's cultivation was truly somewhat unfathomable. Chen Changsheng's group had no idea that this old man was one of the three remaining guardians of the Tang clan. In the coup of the Mausoleum of Books, at that crucial moment, this old guardian had always been at the Tang second master's side. One could imagine his status and strength in the Tang clan. Yet this old guardian, who was half a step from the divine, was only a guide in the Tang clan's old estate today. Just how deep was the Wenshui Tang clan's hidden strength? Only now did Linghai Jiwang realize that no matter how exaggerated the imaginations of the Tang clan were, they were still not as shocking as the truth. He became very wary, very concerned about Chen Changsheng's safety. Yet neither he, Zheshio, nor Nang were able to follow Chen Changsheng into the Tang clan's old estate, because the old guardian had expressionlessly glanced at him. And then Chen Changsheng shook his head. It's about to reach 515. I hope that I can continue to charge at the red packet ranking of 515. On the 15th of May, the reign of red packets will reward the readers and advertise my works. One Piece is still love, so I'll definitely do my best. Chapter 837. P.S. Today's update, while at the same time pulling in votes for the starting point 515 fan festival. Each person has 8 votes, and each vote will also give away some coins. I kneel down and beg for everyone's support and praise. Facing him was a very simple and crude wooden door. But the stone eaves above the door were built with extreme care and exaggeration, even higher than the height of the door itself. From top to bottom, countless plaques were lined up. Chen Changsheng raised his head and vaguely saw many familiar signatures. These signatures belonged to successive emperors and successive popes. There were emperors of the Zhou dynasty, emperors of the previous dynasty, and even more ancient emperors whose names he had only read in books. He was even more familiar with the names of these popes. He realized that the pope at the very bottom was none other than his own grandmaster. The emperor at the very bottom was Emperor Taizong. There was no Tianhai Divine Empress, no previous pope. It was obvious that before that old man in the Tang clan's old estate passed away, the previous pope and the Tianhai Divine Empress he disliked did not have the right to leave behind their mark. The old guardian of the Tang clan stood on the side, his expression unchanged, nor did he seem to urge him. To these elders of the Tang clan, this sort of scene had already occurred countless times over the countless years. This was the true foundation of the Tang clan, because this was all history that could be seen. It was incomparably real, even somewhat real. Snow suddenly began to fall from the sky. The snow was not heavy, but it danced around the old estate. Qin Changsheng took out an old umbrella from somewhere, opened it, and walked into the courtyard. Upon seeing this old umbrella, the old guardian's expression finally changed. His eyes narrowed, but it was impossible to see what he was thinking. The old estate's main gate was very simple, and so was the main courtyard. Flat limestone covered the ground, washed by countless years of wind and rain, stepped on by countless people, so smooth that it was like a mirror. When one walked on it, it was very difficult not to think that Emperor Taizong had also walked on this same place. The limestone you are stepping on right now might have been stepped on by Zhou Dufu. That old well you see, perhaps Wang Jitsu drank from it. Then when Suli walked into this small courtyard, did he hold an umbrella? The Tang family's old guardian stopped at the gate. Qin Changsheng held the old umbrella and walked up the stone steps. Arriving in front of the house, he looked inside. There was a high threshold between the house and the house. He stood outside the threshold. The old man was inside the threshold. In fact, that person's hair was completely white, but he didn't look old. However, his eyes were like an old well in the courtyard, as if nothing in the world could cause any ripples. Was this the Tang old master? For the past 1,000 years, the most mysterious person on the continent was naturally the demon military advisor Black Robe. To many people, the Tang old master of Wenshui City was equally mysterious. The common people only knew that the Tang old master was the wealthiest person on the continent. Even when the Elder of Heavenly Secrets was still alive, his wealth was far inferior. The common people also knew that the Tang old master was one of the most powerful people on the continent. Not even the Tianhai Divine Empress could do anything to him. The common people also knew that the Tang old master was the longest-lived person on the continent. As far back as the era of Emperor Taizu, people had already seen him. But no one knew just how much money the Tang old master had, just how terrifying the power he wielded, and just how old he was. And even now, no one knew what the Tang old master's true strength was. Back then, even the Pavilion of Heavenly Secrets failed to find out. Of course, even if they did, they wouldn't dare to say it out loud. After becoming clan head, the Tang old master had not exchanged blows with anyone, and it had been several hundred years since then. Some people analyzed that the Tang old master had assuredly stepped into the divine domain long ago, but he didn't care or need to be famous in the secular world, so the common people did not know. Otherwise, how could he prop up the sky above Wenshui City? How could he stand as an equal with the saints? How could the majority of the storms of the 8 directions greet him as a junior? Of course, there were also many people who opposed this view. They believed that the Tang clan relied on its unimaginable wealth and deep roots to achieve such a transcendent status on the continent, and that the Tang old master was only skilled at managing the clan. He was not as powerful as people imagined. Regardless of which conjecture it was still a conjecture, and it seemed like it would never be proven. Still, no one knew what sort of person the Tang old master was. Other than a few elders of Wenshui City and a few descendants of the Tang clan's old estate, no one even knew what the Tang old master looked like. In the capital's Orthodox Academy, Qin Changxing had heard Tang 36 speak of the Tang old master many times. In Tang 36's narration, his grandfather was a benevolent, amusing old man who loved to hold his only grandson on his knee and tell him stories of the past. The moon of the demon race moved through the cotton-like clouds, and the wind blew against the sails. In the night, it looked like a rope made of stars. The scenery was constantly changing, and people naturally had many sides, and they could also change. The grandfather in Tang 36's eyes was naturally not the true Tang old master, or perhaps not the entire Tang old master. And besides, the Tang old master now had a grandson. Several years ago, when Qin Changsheng was going to Hanqiu City, he had passed by Wenshui. The Tang old master had given him a gift, but he had not seen him. Today was his first time seeing the Tang old master, so even he couldn't help but be a little nervous. But he did not show it. He calmly shook off the snowflakes on his old umbrella, put it back on the wall, and then stepped over the threshold into the room. Both his movements and expression were very natural, like he was returning home. The Tang Old Master was even more natural because this had always been his home. The Tang Old Master was eating porridge, and he was eating so heartily that he could clearly hear the sound. Besides the bowl of porridge, there were also several small dishes on the table, all of them very ordinary. It didn't take long for the Tang Old Master to finish the porridge in his bowl. He picked up a towel and wiped his mouth, then said, "There's a saying that says, 'Old masters drink porridge, shameless and vulgar.' I've been paying more attention to my health recently, so I don't want to answer to this saying." Chen Changsheng was dazed for a few moments before he understood the meaning of these words. He glanced at the remaining porridge in the bowl and thought it over, then said, "If you want to strengthen your teeth, you can't eat things that are too hard, but eating porridge every meal is also inappropriate." The Tang Old Master placed the towel back on the table and said, "If you don't mind living long, why would you eat porridge every day? This is just breakfast." Chen Changsheng did not follow up with this, saying, "For the sake of making a living, it's extremely good to boil some millet porridge or oats for breakfast. Rice, on the other hand, tends to harm the stomach." The Tang Old Master glanced at him and asked, "Are you very skilled at these things?" Chen Changsheng calmly replied, "My medical skills might not be as good as Master's, but in terms of health, he's not as good as me." The Tang Old Master looked at him and asked, "Since you admit that your medical skills are not as good as your Master's, why did you come to see me and say that you would treat my cold?" Chen Changsheng replied, "Treating the sick and saving people is something that a doctor should do. Moreover, I'm the Pope, so I should do this even more." The Tang Old Master's expression did not change. "You feel that your master does not have the right to treat the sick and save people?" Chen Changsheng's expression also did not change. "If the name is not correct, the words are not correct, and if the words are not correct, the matter will be difficult to accomplish." These words were very interesting. If the Prince of Xiang and the others were to hear them, they would probably ponder over them for a long time, trying to discern more of their meaning. It's almost time for the 515 Red Packet rankings. I hope that the Red Packet rankings can continue to charge into the 515 Red Packet rankings. On the 15th of May, the Reign of Red Packets will reward the readers and also publicize the works. One Piece is Love. Chapter 838. This PS was also added by the system. It has nothing to do with me. The Tang Old Master looked in his eyes and asked, "Even if he taught an emperor and a pope, he still doesn't have the right?" Chen Changsheng calmly replied, "Since one is the emperor and the other is the pope, why not let them do it themselves?" The young eagles had already left their nests and began to learn to fly. The saplings were strong and no longer feared the wind and rain, so they should be allowed to freely grow. Only in this way could they become mighty eagles soaring over the horizon. Only in this way could they soar into the heavens and obtain even more rain, dew, and sunlight. All the books in that old temple in Xining village were given to me, and the rest were left to senior brother. No matter how large the family business is, it still has to be passed down to the younger generation. Chen Changsheng continued, "And this is the world, not Master's home alone." The Tang Old Master said nothing. The steward of the old estate walked over from somewhere and quickly took away the bowls and plates on the table without making a sound. Soon after, a teapot and 2 cups were placed on the table, but the tea in the teapot was not poured into the cups. Chen Changsheng formally bowed to the Tang Old Master as a junior, and then, without waiting for a response, walked over to the table and sat down. He raised the teapot and filled the cup in front of the Tang Old Master, then filled the cup in front of him. He felt like he had returned to the past, returned to that stone table in the 100 Garden. The last of his nervousness vanished, and he truly calmed down. The Tang Old Master could clearly sense the change in his mental state, and a hint of admiration appeared on his face. "I also don't like the phrase rule over the world," he said to Chen Changsheng, "but do you feel that you have the right, the ability to rule over the world?" Treating was treating an illness, but also governing. Chun Chongqing replied, I believe that senior brother has the ability. As for me, I am also learning. The Tang old madam fell silent for a very long time, then suddenly asked, when you first entered the old estate, what was your first feeling? Chun Chongsheng very seriously thought it over, then replied, it was more ordinary than I imagined. Even those plaques on the gate felt very deliberately made to appear ordinary. To ordinary clans, even to those orthodox clans, those plaques on the gate of the Tang clan's old estate were supreme glories. But to the Tang family, these glories were somewhat intentional because the Tang family didn't need them. On the contrary, these glories would dilute the Tang family's sense of mystery. In Chun Chongqing's words, they would appear ordinary. The Tang old master explained, because the old estate has always been a very ordinary courtyard. The reason it's not ordinary is because all the successive heads of the Tang clan have lived here. Chun Chongsheng understood what the old master meant. Many people believe that the Tang old master was mysterious because he had never fought with anyone, because the Tang clan was too frightening. No one dared to show him the slightest disrespect, so his true cultivation might not be as frightening as the legends said. But the Tang old master's words to Chun Chongqing today were very clear. The reason why the Tang family was so terrifying was because the Tang family's successive patriarchs were all very powerful, including the old master himself. Chun Chongsheng said, but you are willing to meet me in the old mansion, which means you are willing to listen to me. The Tang old master replied, I haven't seen an outsider in many years. You are the fifth outsider I've seen in the old mansion. Chun Chongqing knew that Su Li and Wang Po were assuredly among these five, but he didn't know if Mo Yu had seen the Tang old master when she came to Wenshui. If she hadn't, then who were the other two? Su Yurong, the Tang old master said, I have a rather good relationship with her. I was willing to meet you today largely because I was very curious just what sort of person she likes. This time, Chun Chongsheng was truly shocked. Only last night did he learn that Su Yurong had come to Wenshui to treat the illness of the Tang clan's first master before her death seclusion. He had not expected her to have this sort of relationship with the Tang clan. He thought in confusion that although Su Yurong was the holy maiden of the south and had enough status to converse with the Tang old master, there was a gap of countless years between the two of them. There was simply no way to find any similarities, so why did the old master say that he had a rather good relationship with her? The Tang old master explained, there are countless relationships in this world, friendship, family, friendship. All of these relationships have their own inconveniences, their own conflicts, their own hypocrisy or concessions. Only one kind of relationship is the most honest and simple, one that allows one to clearly see what the other is thinking without exhausting too much brain power. Chun Chongqing asked, what kind of relationship? The Tang old master put down his teacup and lightly tapped the table twice. Mahjong friends. Chun Chongsheng stared blankly for a very long time. Only now did he notice that the table in front of the Tang old master was no ordinary table. The table was square and made from the most precious and tough ironwood. The surface of the table was extremely smooth, but if one carefully examined it, one could see many fine lines on the surface. One could imagine that these lines had been worn out over the years by some rather hard objects. Then he realized that there was a small flat box hidden on each of the four sides of the table. Were these boxes used to store banknotes and copper coins? It turned out that this was a mahjong table. The Tang old master had played mahjong at this table for several hundred years and had changed his mahjong friends countless times. He also didn't know when it started, but he had a new mahjong friend. It was a little girl from South Stream Temple. Yuran likes to play mahjong? Chun Chongsheng found it rather hard to imagine. Not only does she like it, she plays it especially well. Even I can't beat her. Many times, I was tempted to call Purr back. The Tang old master's eyes were like that old well in the courtyard, calm and unfathomable. But it's clear that you don't like to play mahjong, and you're even worse at playing mahjong. Since this is the case, I recommend that you never come to this table in the first place. After saying this, he raised the teacup and slowly drank, not caring whether the tea was hot or cold. To serve tea was to send off a guest. After drinking half the tea, the guests should know the difficulty and retreat. Qin Changsheng did not think this way. He was well-versed in the Taoist canon, knew astronomy, geography, and countless sword styles, but he did not know how to write the word difficult. He looked at the Tang Old Master and said, "Sir might really not know what I want to say." The Tang Old Master said no more. No matter how the wind howled, how could the bottom of the old well ripple? If the Tang Old Master did not want to hear, who could force him to? "Sir drank my tea," Qin Changsheng said. The Tang Old Master replied, "So what? And this is my tea." Qin Changsheng replied, "In the old temple of Xining, Senior Brother was the one who boiled and distributed the tea. In these last few years, I've only poured tea for one person." The Tang Old Master was rather interested and asked, "Who?" Qin Changsheng recalled those nights in the 100 Garden, his mood somewhat complicated. He said, "The Divine Empress." Chapter 839. P.S. Here's today's update, and at the same time, I like to pull in votes for the Qijian 515 Fan Festival. Everyone has 8 votes, and the votes will also be given some coins. I beg for everyone's support. The entire continent knew that even the Tianhai Divine Empress had treated the Tang Old Master with great respect. Qin Changsheng knew even more clearly from Tang 36. The Tang Old Master spent every day in the old estate cursing the Tianhai clan, but he rarely touched on the Empress herself. The Tianhai Divine Empress had summoned the Tang Old Master to the capital, but the Tang Old Master had not accepted the decree. This seemed unyielding, but from another perspective, it indicated a few problems. The Tang Old Master did not like the Tianhai Divine Empress. In his eyes, she was a demon empress, but the Tianhai Divine Empress had always made him very apprehensive, and even made him admire her in certain aspects. Qin Changsheng said, "I want to use this cup of tea to exchange for Sir listening to me say a few words." If he had said those words on his own when he first entered the old estate, the Tang Old Master would naturally have been able to hear them. But hearing did not mean that he would be able to listen. He wanted the Tang Old Master to seriously listen to his words. He had to listen. Listen to his ears. Listen to his heart. The Tang Old Master still said nothing. Perhaps this meant that he was silently agreeing. The Tang First Master is not sick, but poisoned. These were Qin Changsheng's first words. The Tang Old Master's expression did not change, as if he had not heard. The Tang Second Master is colluding with the demons. These were Qin Changsheng's second words. The Tang Old Master slightly narrowed his eyes, and then very slowly placed the teacup back on the table. He looked at Qin Changsheng, his voice devoid of emotion. "His Holiness the Pope's sword truly is sharp, and its trajectory is also very clear, but you should not have used your sword today." These 2 words truly were swords. These were the 2 intellectual swords that Qin Changsheng had prepared for a very long time. These were the sword styles he had learned from Su Li. The Tang Old Master had known Su Li for many years and had a close relationship, so how could he not see through them? Thus, for the first time, the words "His Holiness the Pope" came out of the Old Master's mouth. From this moment on, there were no more seniors and juniors playing porridge and small tea, pouring tea and drinking tea, mahjong friends and old friends. I didn't take the initiative to attack. I was just passively defending. Qin Changsheng was unperturbed by the Tang Old Master's change in attitude. He calmly said, "On that night in the mountains, the Tang clan was the first to strike. Later on, in Hanqiu City and last night, there were people who wanted to kill me. Since this is the case, I have no reason not to respond." The Tang Old Master very succinctly said, "Evidence." Even if Qin Changsheng was the Pope, he could not casually accuse the Tang clan of anything without evidence. This was the Tang clan's old estate, not the Mount Song army headquarters. His opponents were not the princes and divine generals of the imperial court, but the Tang Old Master. I have no proof. Qin Changsheng did not wait for the Tang Old Master to express his opinion. He continued, "Other than the Demon Lord's words, I have no other evidence, and the Demon Lord's words can naturally be used to sow discord. But I have a witness, the Demon Princess Nake. She's currently somewhat demented, so she's even less likely to lie." The Tang Old Master's eyes narrowed even more. He did not seem like an old fox, but like a sheet of paper that had been battered by the wind and rain for many years. Then what does His Holiness the Pope want me to promise you? I need 2 hours. Time belongs to one's own. What I need is 2 hours in Wenshui City. Chun Changsheng looked at the Tang Old Master and said, in these 2 hours, I will find that monster from the longevity sect, and he will be the evidence. What did he mean by 2 hours in Wenshui City? He did not say it clearly, but his meaning was clear. In these 2 hours, he hoped that the Tang clan could hand over control of Wenshui City to the Orthodoxy. When the Orthodoxy began a search or even a pursuit, the Tang clan could not interfere. There was no doubt that this was a very whimsical, even absurd idea. For countless years, neither Emperor Taizong nor the Tianhai Divine Empress had ever truly taken control of Wenshui City. Now, Qin Changsheng wanted to do this. Even if it was only for a brief period of 2 hours, the Tang clan would definitely not accept it. The outcome of this negotiation had been decided from the very start. But Qin Changsheng still brought it up, because he hoped that Senior had already changed the Tang Old Master's mind. Regretfully, what he hoped to see did not happen. 3 days ago, he sat in your current position and said something to you that had roughly the same meaning, but I did not agree. The Tang Old Master impassively said, unless your holiness can persuade him to change his surname, there is no need to discuss this matter. After a few moments of silence, Chen Chongqing asked, even if your holiness clearly knows that there is a problem within the Tang clan, that the evidence is in Wenshui City, you think I care about these things? Your holiness, you are still too young. You have no idea how many dark, even dark, things we elders have seen. If I don't want to believe it, I won't believe it. If you want to change my mind, you must pay a corresponding price. The Tang Old Master glanced at the old umbrella outside the door and said, just making me reminisce is far from enough. Chun Changsheng was quiet for a while, then said, I hope that your holiness can reconsider. The Tang Old Master replied, I've already made my decision. Chun Changsheng said, there's no need for your holiness to rush. I can wait. The Tang Old Master replied, I don't like outsiders in my estate. Chun Changsheng said, I can wait outside the old estate. The Tang Old Master replied, as you wish. Chun Changsheng stood up and walked out of the room. Crossing the threshold, he took up the old umbrella and walked into the courtyard. While he was speaking with the Tang Old Master, the snow had grown heavier and heavier. A thick layer of snow had accumulated on the limestone floor, making it rather soft and comfortable to walk on. Chun Changsheng held up the old umbrella and, led by the old guardian, walked out of the old estate. Linghai Zhuang and the others came forward to welcome him. Chun Changsheng shook his head. Linghai Zhuang and the others showed no change in expression, because they had already predicted that the Tang Old Master would never agree to this request. Logically speaking, the Pope's request truly was the best method of directly tearing apart the Black Curtain and finding the mastermind. But what if the mastermind was the Tang Old Master? Even if it wasn't, Wenshui City was the Tang clan, and the Tang clan was the Tang Old Master. If the Pope wanted to tear open the layers of curtains covering Wenshui City, wouldn't that be tantamount to lifting the Tang Old Master's clothes to see what was going on? How could the Tang Old Master agree? Linghai Zhuang and the others were prepared to welcome Chun Changsheng back to his carriage and return to the Taoist church for further discussion. Chun Changsheng shook his head once more and turned to the Tang clan's old estate. Just like that, he stood in the snow. Countless gazes fell on his body. At first, they were confused, but then they quickly turned to shock. Was the Pope prepared to just stand in the snow and wait for the Tang Old Master to change his mind? Doesn't the title of these 2 chapters add together make besh? I've almost forgotten the content. When will I read it again? It's about to reach 515. I hope that the red envelope rankings can continue to charge at the 515 red envelope rankings. On the 15th of May, the reign of red envelopes will reward the readers and also advertise the works. One Piece is also love, so I'll definitely do my best. Chapter 840. Ah, how beautiful life is. Archbishop and Lin stepped forward and draped a large cloak over Chun Chongqing's body. Time slowly passed, but the snowstorm showed no signs of slowing down. On the contrary, it only intensified. When Shui's city was covered in a vast expanse of white, the temperature rapidly dropping. The snow on the umbrella grew thicker and thicker, but Chun Chongqing's hand gripping the handle remained steady, not trembling in the slightest. Of course, he had no intention of leaving. The dark pope's robe, the white cloak, and the slightly old umbrella were a very beautiful sight. But this sight made both the Orthodoxy and the Tang clan grow more and more anxious. A tense atmosphere gradually enveloped the old estate, and even the mountain behind it became rather cold and threatening. Even now, no one could confirm Chun Chongqing's true intentions. Did he want to use his sincerity to move the Tang old master? Or was he using his status as the Pope to intimidate the entire Tang clan? Regardless of which, if he continued to stand in the snowstorm, something would eventually happen. Just as the atmosphere outside the old estate was growing tenser and tenser, just as Ling Hai Jiwang's complexion was growing gloomier and gloomier, just as the steward of the Tang clan's old estate was growing paler and paler, a voice suddenly rang out in everyone's ears. It was the sound of military boots stepping on the soft snow. It was very pleasant to the ear. An officer walked over from the snowy street. This officer had a face covered in snow, making it impossible to tell his true age. Under the gazes of countless experts in the snowstorm, he casually walked over, all the way to Chun Chongqing's side. Then, he extended his hand and took Chun Chongqing's umbrella. Many years ago, at the highest point of the mausoleum of Zhou, Chun Chongqing held up the umbrella amidst the howling winds, holding up the collapsing sky. In the next moment, he appeared tens of thousands of li away, on the snowy plains of the land of demons. Even in the distance, he could see the silhouette of Shuilao City. At the time, he was still in a half-kneeling position, holding up the umbrella. Footsteps could be heard, followed by a soft gasp. There's a sword. The person took the yellow paper umbrella from his hand. Then the person took out a sword from the umbrella. A demon general fell. A tear appeared in the shadow in the sky. Many years later, in the snowstorm of Shui City, Chun Chongqing once more held up the umbrella. Footsteps sounded behind him again. The man didn't say anything and directly took the umbrella in his hand. At this moment, Chun Chongqing had a misconception that that person had returned. But that was not the case. He also knew the people who came this time. For some reason, when Luo Bu took the umbrella, Chun Chongqing felt much more relaxed, as if a lot of weight had been removed from his body. Luo had once told him in the Orthodox Academy that the White Emperor had told her that she would live happily and happily, because when the sky collapsed, there would be someone tall to hold it up. He was taller than Luo, so whether it was against the demon race's assassination or at other times, he had to support her. It was the same in the Garden of Zhou, until someone taller than him appeared, until someone took the umbrella from him. On the snowy plains of the land of demons, it was Su Li who had taken his umbrella. Today, it was Luo Bu who took over his umbrella. Luo Bu naturally could not be compared to Su Li, but he was born with that temperament. Regardless of the matter, responsibility, sword, or umbrella, as long as you hand it over to him, you can rest assured. As he gazed at Luo Bu's back, Chun Chongqing understood many things. He was somewhat shocked, somewhat sorrowful. He finally understood why Go Hanshi, Guan Fei Bai, Zheshio, and even Tang 36 would always have this sort of attitude when this person was mentioned. He also understood why Tang 36 had suddenly changed his attitude towards him in Sloping Cliff Horse Farm. When he thought of this, Chun Chongqing felt a rare feeling of envy. He was not envious of Luo Bu, but envious of those people who had known Luo Bu for a long time and could become friends with him. Like Go Hanshi, Guan Fei Bai, and the other disciples of the Mountly Sword sect, and even Zheshio and Tang 36. They were schoolmates. Even if they did not know each other now, they could still become friends in the future. But he and Luo Bu would never have this possibility. Luo Bu raised the old umbrella and walked into the Tang clan's old estate. Chun Chongqing said nothing. The people of the Orthodoxy naturally would not do anything, and strangely, the people of the Tang clan also showed no intention of stopping him. In the swirling snow, his figure vanished behind the door. The Tang old master looked at him and said, "I didn't think that you would come." Luo Bu bowed as a junior and said, "Sir knows that I've always liked to join in on the fun." The Tang old master indifferently said, "If your father knew that you would appear, he probably wouldn't be happy." Luo Bu helplessly said, "I often do things that make Lord Father unhappy. Now that I think about it, I'm truly unfilial." The Tang old master's attitude towards him was clearly more casual than his attitude towards Chen Changsheng. He casually said, "If he really felt that you were unfilial, why didn't he drive you out of the clan? Why is it that every time you get drunk, you take out those characters you wrote when you were young and show them off to everyone?" Luo Bu bitterly smiled. "The father's flaunting is often the son's disgrace." The Tang old master suddenly said, "Since you also feel that your father is a headache, why don't you just take my surname?" Luo Bu felt even more helpless. "I'm not Wang Pa. Sir, please don't tease me." The Tang old master asked, "Don't you think that your family's surname is very strange?" Luo Bu smiled. "How is Qiushan strange? I think it's pretty good." The surname Qiushan was not common, but it was very famous. This was because one of the 4 great clans of the south was called the Qiushan clan. This was because the Qiushan clan had an extremely famous person called Qiushan Jun. He was the personal disciple of the Mount Li sword sect master and had directly inherited Su Li's legacy. He was the head of the Divine Kingdom's 7 laws and possessed the bloodline of the true dragon. In the past few years, he had been the idol of countless young girls, the unquestionable leader of the younger generation of cultivators. No matter how one looked at him, he was impeccable and almost perfect. And then he disappeared for 5 years. Other than 3 people, no one knew where he had been those 5 years. After that snowfall on the capital's bridge of helplessness, he concealed his identity and went to the north. In the snow-covered wilderness, he fought with the demons for 5 whole years. Luo Bu was Qiushan Jun. He was a great general of Sloping Cliff and also a pine tree of Mount Li. In his conversation with Chen Changsheng, the Tang master had mentioned that in the last few years, he had only seen 5 outsiders in the old estate. In the last few years, the most outstanding or most talented individuals in the human world just happened to be 5. Su Li, Wang Pa, Su Yurong, Chen Changsheng, and of course, Qiushan Jun. And because of his relationship with his clan, he was the person other than Wang Pa who had entered the old estate the most. "Why have you come?" the Tang old master asked. Qiushan Jun replied, "Today, I want to take away the agreement Marshal Granduncle made with Sir." Chapter 841. The Tang old master calmly gazed at him for a very long time, like he was looking at a strange stone that could not be seen at all. Qiushan Jun faintly smiled. "Is this request very strange?" The Tang old master replied, "It truly is very strange because the one standing outside the door is Chen Changsheng, not Su Yurong." Qiushan Jun said, "I feel that Chen Changsheng's request is very reasonable." The Tang old master asked why. Qiushan Jun smiled. "Your second son poisoned his first son." The Tang old master jeered, "And you know?" Qiushan Jun replied, "I didn't see it, and neither did Junior sister, but he's Chen Changsheng, Shang Xingzhou's student. If I don't believe him, who do I believe?" The Tang old master's eyes were still slightly narrowed, his eyes extremely like the ancient well in the courtyard, serene and deep, and also increasingly cold from the falling snow. The voice that came from his lips was also so cold that it made one's hair stand on end. Even if it's true, so what? Emperor Taizong killed all his brothers, but he still created a peaceful and prosperous era, becoming a wise sovereign through the ages. The Tang old master expressionlessly said, "Even if my second son poisoned me to death, as long as the family business was not ruined, it would be a good thing." Qiushan Jun's smile gradually faded as he calmly looked into the old master's eyes. "But your second son colluded with the demons." From a moment he entered the old estate and began speaking with the old master. Qiu Jun's tone had always been very casual and natural, extremely like that of a cute and obedient junior. Many of his words ended with the word unfilial, embarrassing, pretty good, reasonable. The young men and women of Jiangnan spoke with very pleasant accents, babbling and babbling. When he spoke, he still ended his words with the word but this time, the feeling was completely different. The snowstorm in the north was too great. In order to send a military order further, one had to shout so that his comrades could hear. Run, charge, kill, quickly come and save them. Qiu Jun did not say these words, but shouted them. Your second son colluded with the demons. His expression was solemn, and his will was firm. His voice was like steel and iron, extremely bright and clear. It could pierce through the wind and snow and be heard by both his living and dead companions. No matter how heavy the snowstorm was, it could not drown out his voice. Everyone around the old house heard it. Presumably, it wouldn't be long before all of Wenshui City would hear it, and then the entire continent would hear it. The old house was abnormally quiet. It was deathly still, and the snowfall was also silent. The Tang old master narrowed his eyes and looked at Qiu Jun in silence for a very long time. Suddenly, he asked, was it very enjoyable? Qiu Jun had already regained his composure and said, it feels pretty good. The Tang old master asked, is there a need to go this far? Qiu Jun said, some things, if you don't find a way to shout it out, then it may never be heard by others. The Tang old master asked, you think that the entire world must believe your words? Qiu Jun said, I used 20 years to protect my reputation. Now that I think about it, it might be because I wanted the world to believe in me for once. The Tang old master said nothing. When it came to fame, no one could compare to Qiu Jun. Many things and many people over the years had long since proved this point. In Mount Li, the words of Su Li and the sect master were not as influential as his. In the south, not even Wang Po was as trustworthy as Qiu Jun, because Wang Po was still a person of Tianliang County. Qiu Jun said, back then, Marshal Granduncle had no money, so this yellow paper umbrella was always left in Wenshui. After that incident, you promised Marshal Granduncle that as long as you saw this umbrella, you would agree to one of his requests. Chen Changsheng did not know of this matter, but I did. The Tang old master's gaze fell on the old umbrella in his hand. In the end, this umbrella is still somewhat different from the one from before. Yes, it's still lacking something. Qiu Jun extended his hand and pulled out a sword from the sheath at his waist. This sword was as clear as the autumn waters, clearly not ordinary. The Tang old master's pupils constricted at the sight of this sword. Even a powerful figure like him was somewhat astonished. He actually didn't take this sword with him? Marshal Granduncle left the sword with me and left the umbrella with Chen Changsheng. Now that the two of us have come, it's equivalent to him coming. Qiu Jun thrust the sword into the handle of the old umbrella. There was no sound. It was like the sword had always been a part of the umbrella. Seeing the umbrella was like seeing the person. When Chen Changsheng once more entered the old estate, he realized that Luo, who had already left, but the umbrella was still there. He silently gazed at the old umbrella, thinking to himself, I truly am stronger than Senior Su Li, so I did not take the umbrella. You want 2 hours of Wenshui City, and I'll give it to you. The Tang old master expressionlessly said, but you cannot use the Orthodoxy's people, only my Tang clan's people. Because of the agreement from back then, he had agreed to Chen Changsheng's request, but it was clear that he could not allow the Orthodoxy's priests to search the residences of the various branches of the Tang clan, much less permit the Orthodoxy's cavalry to rampage through Wenshui City. This was the Tang clan's bottom line. The problem was that neither Chen Changsheng nor the other important figures of the Orthodoxy understood the specific circumstances of the Tang clan's various branches. Even if the Tang clan's strength seemed to obey the Tang old master's orders, how could they guarantee that the Tang clan's people were truly willing to put an effort? In short, using the Tang clan's people to investigate the matters of the Tang clan was absurd, even laughable. But the Tang old master would not make a single concession. Chen Changsheng said, Wen Shui City's 2 hours need not be given to me. The Tang old master asked. Then who should I give it to? Chen Chongqing replied. I have a friend. The Tang old master narrowed his eyes. Chen Chongqing looked at him and said, Sir once gave him 20 years, but now you're not even willing to give him 2 hours? The Tang clan's ancestral hall was very old as the old estate, even older than the capital's imperial palace. Whether it was the white walls that were painted over every 3 years or the black eaves that were repaired every 7 years, no matter how new they looked, they could not completely conceal the ancient aura exuding from the cracks in the bricks and the eaves. Many memorial tablets had been placed in the ancestral hall, many candles lit on the table, and a prayer mat in front. The prayer mat was also very old. Perhaps because of the environment, the young man sitting on the prayer mat had a weathered expression on his face. The beard on his face was of different lengths and looked very messy. His hair was even messier, and his clothes were somewhat dirty. One could describe him as disheveled and dirty. His eyes used to be very bright, even threatening, but now they were deathly still. His lips were still thin, but their former harshness and joy had all been reduced to silence. After being in prison here, he had not spoken for half a year. In the spacious and quiet ancestral hall, his figure was lonely. Chapter 842. When he was facing eunuch Lin in the Orthodox Academy, when he was facing his master Shang Xingzhou, when he was in the snowy mountains, when he was facing the Tang second master in the Taoist church last night, whenever he encountered those depressing figures and elders, Chen Chongsheng would always think of that friend. That was the first friend he met after coming to the capital from Xining village, and it could also be said to be the first friend of his life. His acquaintance with that friend was actually rather inexplicable. It was when the Heavenly Tao Academy was recruiting students. Many examinees who had completed their purification and even reached the meditation realm were lining up to be tested. He, who had no idea what cultivation was, saw a youth dressed in blue, and then that youth, who was clearly a cultivation genius, said that he was also a genius. That youth went to the Plum Garden Inn, found Chen Chongsheng, ate a meal, and then the two became friends. It was as simple as that. That friend was called Tang Tang. At the time, he was ranked 36th on the proclamation of Azure Sky, so he changed his name to Tang 36. From that time until now, the proclamation of Azure Sky and the proclamation of Star Distinction had changed countless times. His ranking was also constantly changing, but he never changed his name. Perhaps it was because he had always lived under the name Tang 36 in his most cherished youth. The reason Chen Chongsheng would often think of Tang 36 and miss him, besides because he was his friend, was also because Tang 36 had always played an extremely important role for him in the Orthodox Academy. The things that he, Su Mou, Zhixiu, and Xianyuan Po were not good at, Tang 36 was very good at. The things that they could not say, Tang 36 could easily say. The things that they were too embarrassed to do, Tang 36 had never known the meaning of losing face. To put it another way, it was precisely because of Tang 36's existence that he and the Orthodox Academy had been able to pass their years in the capital so easily and smoothly. Tang 36 was the type of person who could make his own people happy and his opponents miserable. Because he was the sole grandson of the Tang clan, he was especially rich and fearless. Especially after entering the Orthodox Academy, he no longer played the part of a graceful young master. He was extremely arrogant, incomparably free and unparalleled. He had scolded little girls on the Divine Avenue and kicked a cripple in 100 Flowers Lane. There was nothing that he did not dare to do. He possessed the things that Chen Chongsheng lacked the most. That was the true hot-bloodedness, youthfulness, and ego hidden beneath the arrogance and haughtiness. During the coup of the Mausoleum of Books, Tang 36 had been forcibly taken away from the capital and returned to Wenshui. It had already been 3 years since then. Apart from the 2.5 years in the old mansion, he had already been imprisoned in the ancestral hall for half a year. His arrogance seemed to have disappeared. Those hot-blooded youthful selves were nowhere to be found. His hair was unkempt and his face was dirty. He was slovenly and his clothes were dirty. His eyes were dull, as if he was a dead man. He kept his mouth shut as if he was mute. There was only numbness and lifelessness on his body, which meant that he had given up and was in despair. Anyone who saw him now would probably think that he was a beggar or an ascetic. No one could associate him with that noble young master who stood among the flowers and received the adoring gazes of countless young girls in the capital. But Chen Chongqing would not, because he understood his friend better than anyone else, trusted him more than anyone else. He believed that even if he discovered that the sun had sunk into the abyss and could no longer rise, that the world was on the verge of destruction, Tang 36 would not hide in his bed and cry. Instead, he would summon all the courtesans of the capital and hold an open meeting. Then, he would bring those youths that he felt were qualified to fight alongside him, bring an unimaginable amount of gold and silver and several carriages full of blue lobsters, and ride the fastest horses towards the place where the sun had set. And then he would incessantly curse at the sky and sing the stupidest songs. If Chen Chongsheng could see the scene in the ancestral hall, he would know that his thoughts were correct and that his worries were unnecessary. Last night, in the Taoist church, he had said to the Tang's second master that he was very worried that Tang 36 might not have a good prayer mat in the ancestral hall, that he might have hurt his knees from kneeling for too long. Tang 36 did not kneel at all. No matter how lonely his figure was, no matter how disheveled and dirty, no matter how lifeless, he still did not kneel. He did not kneel on the prayer mat, but sat on it. And he sat with his legs crossed. It was the most inelegant of sitting postures. His legs were spread open, his crotch facing the countless memorial tablets in front of him. Those memorial tablets were the ancestors of the Tang clan, his ancestors. So what? You want to imprison me, so don't expect me to respect you. Tang 36 was naturally still the Tang 36 of the past. Yes, after being imprisoned in the ancestral hall, he was completely cut off from the outside world, let alone writing to Chen Chongsheng. He didn't even have anyone to talk to. According to the Tang old master's orders, no one was allowed to speak to him. Other than a mute servant responsible for sweeping the courtyard, there was no one else in the ancestral hall. It was also from that day onwards that Tang 36 stopped speaking. No one could carry out the so-called silent resistance more thoroughly than he did. Unable to hear news from the outside world, unable to know how his father's illness was or how his mother was, it was naturally a matter that made him very anxious. But also gave Tang 36 enough time to think and cultivate. Perhaps it was because the ancestral hall was too quiet with no one to disturb him, or perhaps it was because his father's illness was worsening and seemed on the verge of death, but he only needed half a day to understand something that he had not understood 2 years ago, the reason for the Tang Old Master's actions. In the several hundred years that the Tang Old Master had been in charge of the clan, what was the most famous thing about him? It was his insight. Whether it was Su Li or Wang Pe, they both proved that the Tang Old Master had a pair of discerning eyes that could see through people. Later on, when the Tang Old Master gave a yellow paper umbrella to Chen Chongsheng, who was about to enter the Garden of Zhou, it was naturally not because of the friendship between Chen Chongsheng and Tang 36, but because the Tang Old Master valued Chen Chongsheng the same way he valued Su Li and Wang Pe. Moreover, this investment would strengthen the relationship between the Tang clan and the orthodoxy, greatly benefiting from it. Why had he suddenly changed his mind? Firstly, the Tang Old Master and Shang Xingzhou were truly kindred spirits, a secret friendship that had been maintained for several hundred years. At the beginning, he had tacitly allowed Tang 36 to befriend Chen Chongsheng and secretly help the Orthodox Academy largely, because Chen Chongsheng was Shang Xingzhou's student. Now that Chen Chongsheng and Shang Xingzhou, master and disciple, were strangers, the Tang Old Master naturally had to consider which side he should support. From the perspective of the Tang clan's internal affairs, the Tang Old Master needed to resolve the problem of succession. Shang Xingzhou and the imperial court supported the second branch. Chen Chongsheng and the orthodoxy unquestionably supported the chief branch. In the coup of the Mausoleum of Books, the Tang's second master's performance had been extremely outstanding, and Tang 36 was keenly aware that his second uncle's callous and unyielding nature was far more appreciated by the Tang Old Master than his father's gentle path. Crucially, his father was already gravely ill and incurable. If he chose the chief branch, he would be choosing Tang 36. A son in the prime of his life and his methods formidable, a grandson with considerable potential but still not fully fledged. How should he choose? If one looked into the history of the past, casually glanced at the old books, one would know what to choose. Chapter 843. If he chose the latter, the Tang clan was highly likely to win an upheaval, perhaps even split apart. In the end, the former had a greater chance of victory. Thus, this multiple-choice question was extremely simple. The Tang Old Master had decided to support Shang Xingzhou, so he naturally had to give up on Chun Changsheng. The Tang Old Master had decided to pass the Tang clan to the second branch, so he naturally had to suppress the chief branch. If Tang 36 were a mediocre person, perhaps this matter would have been relatively simple. But he was not. Moreover, he had a friend, the current pope. Thus, the Tang Old Master could only imprison him in the ancestral hall. He might be imprisoned for the rest of his life, until he became a white-haired madman in a few decades or 100 years. Of course, it was even more likely that once Shang Xingzhou subdued the orthodoxy and eliminated Qin Changsheng, he would be bestowed a bowl of poison. Yes, poison, dagger, white silk, pit. No matter what method he used, he would still die. A few years ago, Tang 36 naturally would not have believed that the old master would have done this. But now he had long since understood that his benevolent grandfather was just an illusion, an illusion. The Tang Old Master had held him on his knees and told him stories from long ago, describing the splendor of the future with incomparable indulgence. This was naturally love. But what he loved was not the boy in his lap, but the future of the Tang clan. Now, the Tang Old Master had arranged a new future for the Tang clan, and he also had a new grandson. Thus, for the sake of the Tang clan's future, how much he had doted on Tang 36 was now just as cruel. From the moment he understood this matter, Tang 36 no longer hoped that his grandfather would release him. He did not want to be imprisoned in the ancestral hall for the rest of his life, nor did he want to silently die. He wanted to leave this place, but he made no attempt, because on the second day after he was imprisoned in the ancestral hall, many of his father's loyal subordinates had attempted to rescue him. Those people had all died, and later, even more members of the chief branch had died. He could only fall even more silent. Whether it was the paper slips between the stones thrown over the wall or the secret markings carved into the bottom of the dishes, he could only pretend that he did not see them. Gradually, no more urchins threw stones over the wall, no more kites appeared in the sky. It had been a very long time since the main gate of the ancestral hall had opened. No matter how well it was maintained, a door that had not been opened for a long time would always make some unpleasant squeaking sounds when it was opened again. The front door of the ancestral hall opened, and a gust of cold winter wind mixed with snow drifted in. Tang 36 sat on the cattail hassock and stared at the memorial tablet at the top without turning his head. The old guardian of the Tang clan walked up behind him and said, "The old master has something to say to you." There was no chat after a long separation, no greetings, not even a summary of the past. The old consecrator looked at his back without any expression on his face. You need to investigate whether or not Second Master Chu poisoned you, and whether or not he colluded with the demons. You have 2 hours. During this time, the entire Tang clan is yours. Tang 36 didn't turn around. He was still quietly looking at the memorial tablets in the dark ancestral hall. After a long time, he finally spoke. This was the first time he had spoken in half a year. His voice was a little hoarse, and his pronunciation was a little stiff. "That guy's here?" The old consecrator replied, "Yes." Tang 36 still didn't turn around. What did he say to the old master? The old consecrator was quiet for a while. Then he repeated the conversation between Qin Changsheng and the Tang Old Master in the old estate, not making a single mistake. Then he said, "You've already wasted the time of 2 cups of tea. This is the Tang clan. If I wanted to do something, I wouldn't need so much time." Tang 36 stretched, and some dust came out from his clothes. This stretch was so smooth that one could even hear the creaking of bones. Then he got up from the ground, patted the dust off his butt, and took out a palace armchair from the ancestral hall to sit on. He was still unkempt and dirty, still covered in dust, but his eyes were no longer indifferent. They were extremely bright, even somewhat sharp. There was no longer any sense of lifelessness. His body was brimming with vitality that had come from some unknown source. The Tang clan's old guardian narrowed his eyes at this sight. That monster from the longevity sect is called Chusu. What an arrogant name. I admire it. Tang 36 extended his hand and took a cup of tea from the mute servant. After taking a sip, he continued, "If he's already left Wen Shui, where can I go to capture him?" The old guardian seemed to have thought of something, and his expression became rather strange. From the first day he entered the city, the old master sent people to keep an eye on him. He can't leave. Then what need do I have to do? Tang 36 dipped his index finger into the tea and flicked it at the densely packed memorial tablets behind him. As for the second condition, it's very simple. Great Guardian, there's no need to worry about it. I naturally have a way to prove to the old master that second uncle is related to the demons. The old guardian expressionlessly asked, "Then what does Sir want to do now? Call 7th uncle over, call 16th uncle over, and invite the old uncle of Jia Ali over." Tang 36 casually said, "It's been a long time since I've seen these relatives." "You don't say. I really do miss them." The old guardian didn't know why he wanted to see these people or what it had to do with these two matters. The people standing guard outside the ancestral hall also didn't know. But the Tang old master had made it very clear that Tang 36 would be responsible for handling these 2 hours in Wenshui City. Let alone these people. Even if he wanted to call the entire clan to the ancestral hall, he would still have to do so. Even though today's snow was rather heavy, no one dared to defy the Tang old master's will. It didn't take long for the three to arrive at the ancestral hall. As they gazed at Tang 36 seated in the palace armchair, the three felt very complex emotions. They didn't know how to face him. The Pope had come to Wenshui City. The gate to the ancestral hall had been opened, and they had heard that the old master had even given Tang 36 great authority. Just what did this mean? Could it be that the chief branch, which was on the verge of losing power, was about to make a comeback? It's nothing else. The old master gave me a rare 2 hours of freedom and said that I could do whatever I wanted. Tang 36 looked at them and said, "So I called the three of you over to play mahjong with me." The three were rather shocked. They glanced at each other and then at the old guardian. Tang 36 looked at the old guardian and said, "You could do anything, and that naturally includes playing mahjong?" The old guardian expressionlessly replied, "Yes." The mahjong table was quickly prepared. The jade-green jade and bamboo mahjong tiles were neatly arranged, very comfortable to look at. "It's very pleasing to the eye. Don't you agree, 7th uncle?" Tang 36 used his finger to lightly stroke the back of the tiles and sighed. "I wonder what the scenery of the bamboo garden is like in this cold winter." Including his 7th uncle, the other three people at the mahjong table only looked at the tiles in front of them, neither responding nor reacting. Have the people of the Maple Hall go and take a look. Seal up the bamboo garden. Not a single scroll or person can be lost, Tang 36 said as he looked at the tiles. The old guardian said nothing. If one didn't look carefully, they wouldn't be able to tell. He gave a slight nod. Countless stewards and subordinates of the old estate were waiting outside the ancestral hall, following them. Upon hearing this, 7th uncle finally couldn't help but raise his head to glance at Tang 36. Tang 36 showed no reaction. Drawing a tile, he continued, "The cloud group goes to the Serene residence. The River Hall goes to Hesse. I want a map of the Serene residence and a bill for Hesse." At this point, the remaining two people at the mahjong table finally raised their heads. Chapter 844. The old guardian expressionlessly nodded towards the outside of the ancestral hall. The mahjong game in the ancestral hall continued. As Tang 36 drew, played, ate, and touched his cards, he constantly talked. Out of every 2 or 3 sentences, one would be an order to the entire Tang clan. His orders were extremely clear and precise. so clear that even the stupidest of subordinates knew what their mission was, down to which table and which drawer in which room. As his voice echoed through the ancestral hall, the other three people at the table grew more and more solemn, the old guardian narrowing his eyes. Whether it was the old guardian, the other three people at the mahjong table, or the steward waiting outside the ancestral hall, none of them had expected that Tang 36, who had been imprisoned in the ancestral hall for half a year and cut off from the clan's business by the old master for 3 years, would still have such a clear understanding of the Tang clan's internal affairs. What surprised the old guardian the most was that Tang 36 had a deep understanding of the Tang old master's methods of managing the Tang clan, even the most secretive ones. The Cloud Group, River Hall, and Maple Hall, these administrative divisions of the Tang clan were one thing. But how did he know that the Pine 13 Medicine Hall was one of the old estate's law halls? The old guardian glanced at the three people at the table and suddenly felt that today's matter was rather troublesome. It seemed like Tang 36 had randomly chosen 3 elders from each branch, but the old guardian naturally understood the deeper meaning. These 3 people were not the Tang second master's subordinates to manage the Tang clan's affairs, but they privately played an even more important role, as they were the methods used to restrain those managers. The Tang old master had the old guardian come to the ancestral hall to ensure that in these 2 hours, if the second branch could no longer endure the pressure and began to counterattack, they could only use other methods, not forceful methods, to deal with Tang 36. Only this way could Tang 36 act freely. The old guardian suddenly realized that both he and the Tang old master had somewhat underestimated Tang 36. If Tang 36 was truly allowed to act without restraint, given his current understanding of the Tang clan, he might not even need 2 hours to sweep clean the second branch's strength. When the time came, even if they couldn't find evidence that the Tang second master had poisoned Tang 36 or colluded with the demons, so what? You can't kill, the old guardian warned Tang 36. This is the old master's order. Tang 36 held a card in his hand and was about to throw it out. He couldn't help but shake his head and say, "How unlucky." Coffin. With a clatter, the mahjong tile fell onto the shiny black table. It turned out to be an octagonal tile. Seventh Uncle squeezed out a smile on his face and said, "I won." Tang 36 was not dejected at all. He looked at the old consecrator and said, "If we can't kill them, we can torture them, right?" Hearing the word punishment, the faces of the people around the table turned pale. Seventh Uncle stretched out his hand to pick up the octahedron, but upon hearing this, he froze in midair, looking very awkward. In the snowstorm, Wenshui City was still very quiet. All the merchants and ordinary people followed the orders of their clans and hid in their homes. At some point, many men in the Tang clan steward robes began to leave the old mansion, the medicine shop, and many other places. Braving the wind and snow, they headed in a certain direction. The bamboo garden, the quiet residence, Hesse, and even the estate of the second branch by the Wenshui River were all surrounded. Countless account books were dug out of chests and cabinets, while several dozen stewards and shopkeepers were driven out into the snow. Their hands were tied with very thin straw ropes, waiting to be interrogated or released. The places being raided were all core businesses of the Tang clan. In the last few years, the Tang second master had basically personally managed them, and they had long since been replaced by stewards and shopkeepers who were loyal and devoted to him. These people had very high statuses in Wenshui City, so when had they ever received such treatment? They very naturally began to make a ruckus. The most intense conflict took place in the estate of the second branch by the Wenshui River. Even through the fierce snowstorm, stewards and shopkeepers could see the heads of those people sticking out from the other side of the river. They were probably people from the chief branch. When they thought about how they had been seen today, the stewards and shopkeepers felt even more humiliated and angry. They began to curse the people who had come to raid their properties. Under normal circumstances, whether it was the people of the phone group or those stewards from the 13 Pine Drug Company, which they had only just learned was owned by the old estate, they would never dare to treat them so rudely. At the very least, they would give an explanation. But today, these people seemed to have completely changed their faces, as if they didn't recognize them. In a certain part of the estate, less than 2 li from the raided study, there was an even more secluded study. The windows of the study were made of the most transparent glass. Even though the winter sun was hidden behind the clouds of snow, the room was still filled with light and did not feel gloomy at all. The Tang's second master stood in front of the window, gazing at the dancing snowflakes. He slowly opened his mouth and silently laughed. The recent chaos had caused all of Wenshui City to feel nervous and uneasy, much less the people of the second branch. But he was very calm. Because he had managed the Tang clan for 3 years, he knew many things, including the 2 conversations in the old estate and the specific contents of the agreement between his father and Qin Changxing. Poison? As long as Chusu could not be caught, there was no evidence, and the longevity sect's 10,000 years of resources was only left with this monster of the Yellow Springs. So how could it be so easy to catch? He knew that his father had only been forced by Qin Changxing and the Orthodoxy to put on a show. The truly troublesome thing was that shout piercing through the wind and snow. I'm colluding with the demons? The Tang's second master's soundless smile gradually turned cold as he thought to himself. This is truly the greatest humiliation, but also the dirty water that is difficult to wash clean. The Mountly Sword sect has actually gotten involved in this matter. Qiushan Jun's shout is truly vicious to the extreme. You truly raised a good son, he said to the wind and snow outside the window. As it turned out, there had always been someone in the study. The Qiushan clan head had secretly come to Wenshui City a few days ago and had been living in the estate of the Tang clan's second branch. To be able to force second master to this extent, that son of mine is naturally not bad. He looked at the Tang's second master's back, an undisguised, gratified smile on his face, utterly devoid of shame or apology. The Tang's second master did not turn around, but his voice grew cold. The matters of your own clan, take care of them yourself. The Qiushan clan head stood up and smiled. My Qiushan clan is different from your Tang clan. Although I'm the clan head, my son's words carry more weight than mine. Alas, I originally wanted to help him, but it seems like I've caused him more trouble. It's best if I leave quickly. After saying this, he really did leave. As he gazed at the clear footprints in the snow outside the window, the Tang's second master gradually narrowed his eyes. He was keenly aware that with the departure of the Qiushan clan head, the so-called alliance of the 4 great clans had also come to an end. Truly an old fox. He was not afraid of old foxes. As a child, he had interacted with all sorts of old foxes. The problem was that this was the first time he had encountered an old fox as shameless as the Qiushan clan head. The steward hurriedly entered the study and reported the situation in front of the estate. Then he hesitantly asked, "Should we hide the important things?" The Tang's second master replied, "It seems that my eldest nephew has not wasted these past 3 years. He's already grasped many things. This being the case, how can we hide them? Let them make a ruckus. In the end, it'll just be a farce." The steward was startled by these words, and then he became extremely confused. In a view of him and many other members of the Tang clan, even if Tang 36 was in charge of this search, it would ultimately fail to obtain any evidence. However, this search itself had already illustrated a few very important problems. The Tang Old Master's trust in the second master had already been shaken. And it was very obvious that even though the second master had managed the affairs of the Tang clan for 3 years and appeared to be the master of the Tang clan on the surface, in reality, the old master only needed to say the word and some people from the old estate to leave. Wenshui City and the entire Tang clan would still belong to the old master. The Tang's second master knew what the steward was thinking, knew what everyone else was thinking. But he did not explain, nor did he feel like explaining. He only calmly gazed out the window at the snowstorm, silently smiling. This smile contained indescribable mockery. Chapter 845. The activity in the ancestral hall and the happenings in the shops and courtyards of Wenshui City were all reported to the old estate. The person in charge of reporting the situation was the steward of the old house. He spoke very quickly, but his pronunciation was very clear, ensuring that everyone in the house could understand him. In this room, besides the Tang Old Master and Chun Chang Sheng, there was also Zhishio and Nank. They had also come to tell stories, and they had just finished telling the story of the snowy ridge and the stone mountain. The first three people he called into the ancestral hall didn't look like much on the surface, but they were actually the second brother's trusted arms. The Tang Old Master spoke to Chun Changsheng like a storyteller. I didn't think that after my grandson was imprisoned for 3 years, there would still be people sending him information, and their eyes are very sharp. His methods can be considered neat. First, he covered second brother's eyes, mouth, and nose. Then, he covered them with lightning speed. But, in the end, it was still too conventional. Qin Changsheng didn't know what to say. He didn't know much about these things and wasn't good at it. It didn't take long before the steward of the old mansion returned to the house and recounted what had happened in the ancestral hall. What do you think he's doing? Playing cards in the ancestral hall? The Tang Old Master's eyes slightly narrowed, but it was impossible to tell whether he was happy or angry. After a moment of silence, he suddenly smiled at Qin Changsheng. Is Your Holiness the Pope interested in playing a few rounds with me? Qin Changsheng had no interest in playing cards. He didn't even know how to play. Fortunately, for him, who had read the Taoist scriptures since he was a child, he only needed a very short amount of time to learn. At the very least, he didn't need 2 hours. For people were needed to play cards, so Nank and Zhishio also sat down. Zhishio also needed to learn on the spot. Although Nank had played with her sisters in Xiulao City, she was not an expert. As a result, the game progressed very slowly. While they were shuffling the tiles, news from the ancestral hall and Wenshui City was constantly being transmitted to the old estate, to the mahjong table. Young Master sent the phone group to the bamboo garden. The Yun group went to the quiet residence. It is said that they found a few maps. Chuan Tang went to Hesse, but the accounts that eldest young master wanted were never found. There were scorch marks in the snow behind the house. In Wenshui City, amidst the snowstorm, there were 2 mahjong tables. One was in the ancestral hall, and the other was in the old mansion. In fact, today's game was played by 2 people, Tang 36 and the Tang's second master, who had not appeared at the mahjong table. As more and more information came in, the speed at which the Tang Old Master played his mahjong grew slower and slower, the expression on his face more and more complex. There was gratification, regret, vigilance, uneasiness, and a hint of resolution that was hard to see. At some point, a skinny old man in a gray robe had arrived outside the door without making a sound. The skinny old man's expression was calm, and he looked like a retired official who had nothing to do with the world. But Zhishio and Nank both sensed an intense danger. Even though the Tang Old Master was sitting at the head of the mahjong table, they still prepared to transform. Linghai Zhuang and Enlin ignored the obstruction of the people of the Tang clan's old estate and forced their way to the small courtyard outside, because they also felt extreme danger. There were so many experts, but not a single one of them had noticed when this skinny old man had appeared and how he had silently entered the old house. Linghai Zhuang gazed at the thin elder's profile and found it rather familiar, as if he had seen it somewhere before, but he could not remember. Even the Tang Old Master was flabbergasted by the appearance of this skinny old man. The snow is so heavy, so why have you come? Is your rheumatism all right? The skinny old man shook his head to indicate that he was fine, but he said nothing. If it wasn't that he couldn't speak, then he was a man of few words. The steward of the old estate uneasily glanced at the skinny old man. As he wiped the cold sweat from his forehead, he said in a trembling voice, "Eldest young master wants to use the torture hall." The Tang Old Master fell quiet for a while, then took back the tile he had prepared to play. Let him use it. It's just 2 hours. As long as he doesn't burn down the ancestral hall, he can do as he pleases. The steward's body trembled. It was clear that he had not expected the Tang Old Master to actually agree to Tang 36's request. Chen Changshen glanced at Linghai Zhuang, wanting to know what the torture hall was. Linghai Zhuang imperceptibly shook his head, indicating that the Li Palace had no information on it. The skinny old man bowed to the Tang Old Master, nodded to Chun Changsheng, and then left the old estate. From start to finish, he had not said a single word. The mahjong game in the ancestral hall was probably continuing, and a mahjong game in the old estate was starting again. Just as the Tang Old Master won the first game, the steward came again. This time, even more sweat flowed from his forehead, his voice even more shaky. Eldest young master, wants to use 5 kind man. The old estate suddenly became abnormally quiet. The Tang Old Master's complexion flickered as he slammed a tile onto the table and angrily said, "Is he really planning to tear down the ancestral hall?" It had been many years since the steward had seen the old master so angry. As for Qin Changsheng and the others, they had never seen it before. Besides shock, they were also curious. 5 kind man was a very strange name. Just what was it? The Tang Old Master's anger gradually subsided. With a deep and serene gaze, he said, "Let him use it." It didn't take long before the steward returned to the room. This time, his clothes were completely drenched in sweat. The Tong cottage has been burned clean. Eldest young master ordered his fat son-in-law to personally light the fire. The Tong cottage is second son's favorite study. In are many paintings and calligraphy that he bought with his private savings over the years. The Tang Old Master said to Qin Changsheng. Strangely, when Tang 36 had sent someone to burn down the Tang second master's study, the old master had reacted very calmly. It was obvious that in his view, Tang 36's actions that could incite conflict and ignite the anger of the second branch were far less important than the torture hall and 5 kind man. Soon after, more news came from the ancestral hall. This time, the news was rather insignificant. To put it more accurately, it was a trifling matter. The steward said, "Eldest young master says that his stomach isn't feeling too well, so he had someone go to Chicken Crow Nunnery outside the city to bring a table of vegetarian dishes." The Tang Old Master's fingers on the tiles trembled at these words, and then, as if thinking of something, he fell silent for a very long time. Finally, he pushed down the tiles in front of him and said to Qin Changsheng, "I'm not playing anymore." The mahjong game in the old estate had ended, but it was hard to say when the mahjong game in the ancestral hall would end. Qin Changsheng suddenly understood something. This was not a mahjong game between Tang 36 and the Tang second master, but a mahjong game between Tang 36 and the Tang Old Master. Through the events that had taken place, Tang 36 had proven that he knew all the cards in the Old Master's hand, and that he could play them extremely well. Like the torture hall and 5 kind man. But what was up with the vegetarian dishes in Chicken Crow Nunnery? Chapter 846. To the southwest of Wenshui City were 12 extremely large granaries. It was said that they could guarantee a year's supply for the 6 counties of the Great Zhou dynasty. If Wenshui City was besieged, this amount of grain would be enough to support the soldiers and civilians of the city for several centuries. From this, one could easily imagine how much grain these granaries held. The most important thing about granaries was naturally fire prevention, so these granaries were not far from Wenshui. Although it was the middle of winter, standing in the granary, one could still hear the distant sound of running water. In truth, it was not the sound of running water, but the sound of blood. In the deepest granary, there was not a single grain. This incredibly spacious, perhaps even grand, storehouse was empty, with only several dozen people inside. 7 people were stripped naked and hung on the iron chains used to transport the grain. Blood flowed continuously from their bodies and splashed on the ground. They had already suffered countless tortures and were in an extremely miserable state. Even the slaughtered pigs would be much happier than them. The executioners were all very young, and some of them were even teenagers. Their expressions were very focused, and they were not the slightest bit distracted by the scene in front of them. Their faces did not show any sympathy or pity, but there was an occasional bashful expression. These young people were all members of the Tang clan's torture hall, and they all had the same teacher, the thin old man sitting in the chair. It was also the thin old man that had appeared in the old estate not long ago. The 7 prisoners were released. There was not a single piece of unharmed skin on their bodies, and they had lost a great deal of blood, but they were still alive. The problem was that at this moment, they wished that they had never lived. Sign your name, and then I'll send you on your way. The thin old man finally spoke. His voice was as calm as his expression, exceptionally ordinary and ordinary. But to the 7 blood-soaked prisoners on the ground, the old man's voice was like the howl of a demon from the depths of hell, like a flower blooming in the divine kingdom above the sea of stars. Already on their last breaths, they desperately crawled forward, leaving behind several bloody streaks on the floor of the granary. They crawled to the old man, used their already blurry eyes to find a brush and paper, and then used their fastest speed to sign their names. Then they incessantly wept, "Grandpa Way, hurry and kill me." A plume of black smoke rose from the estate, followed by the indistinct glow of fire, and then curses. The Tang's second master's favorite Tong cottage had been personally set on fire by his plump son-in-law, turning into scorched earth. The estate was behind the willow trees on the banks of the Wenshui, but the Tong cottage was located relatively far away, so the fire could not affect the lives in the river. The snowflakes fell on the surface of the water and disappeared instantly. The fish swam slowly in the water plants at the bottom of the water. This was the southern part of the city, where the Tang clan's main branch and second branch lived across the river. It was the most prestigious place in the city. This place was far away from the Taoist Hall and the Long Street. There were no inns or restaurants. Naturally, there would be no pedestrians and no liveliness. Even the servants of the eldest branch who had come to watch the show were captured by Madame Tang. In the next moment, the deserted Wenshui suddenly became lively. 7 peddlers, 6 bailiffs, 3 fortune-tellers, 2 sesame candy-selling elders, and a young girl who bought cosmetic powder suddenly appeared. Everyone knew that these people were not ordinary people. The yamen runners could manage the peddlers, and the fortune-teller could chat with the sesame candy-selling old man, but none of the peddlers sold cosmetic powder. Who would the little girl buy it from? They happened to be 5 kind man Tang 36 had requested 5 kind man from the Tang old master. No one knew that the most frightening aspect of the Tang clan was not those private soldiers, nor was it the old guardian half a step from the divine in the ancestral hall, nor was it even the torture hall. It was these people that no one knew about. The Tang old master flew into a rage upon hearing Tang 36's request. This was his natural reaction to discovering that the Tang clan's true secret and killing move had been discovered. Although that person was his own grandson, he still found it somewhat difficult to accept. From this, one could see the importance of these people to the Tang clan. From the moment Shun Changsheng entered the Taoist hall of Wenshui City, these peddlers, bailiffs, and 5 kind man had been on the other side of the river. They had to keep an eye on the experts of orthodoxy, ready to strike at any moment. At the same time, they had to keep an eye on that clump of water plants in the depths of the river. Just as the Tang clan guardian had said to Tang 36, that monster called Chusu seemed to be moving about in a mysterious and unfathomable manner. But in reality, he had always been in the grasp of the Tang clan's old estate. Today, these peddlers, bailiffs, and fortune-tellers had to follow Tang 36's request and force Chusu out, then capture or kill him. Although the longevity sect had already withered away, its 10,000-year-old foundation was like a mountain. If one looked down, they would see a bottomless abyss. Chusu was the most terrifying product of this abyss. Could these peddlers and bailiffs with ordinary chi defeat him? The 7 peddlers unloaded their frames, took out little toys like rattles, needles for spinning sugar, and dragonflies made of bamboo, and began to assemble them. Their expressions were very calm, even somewhat wooden, but their movements were practiced, concise, and swift. In a very short time, those needles, rattles, and bamboo dragonflies had been assembled. This was a sand table that had been shrunk down several hundred times. The buildings and corridors on it were extremely realistic, like they had been carved out of a walnut by the most brilliant craftsmen. The peddlers placed their hands on the edge of the sand table. 7 different but naturally compatible chis poured into it. 2 fortune tellers walked over, staring at the shrunken buildings and corridors, the long banners in their hands faintly fluttering in the wind and snow. After some time, the wind and snow continued, but the banners stopped. Perhaps it was because their minds were calm, or perhaps because they had already calculated the result. A dot of blood slowly appeared in a certain part of the building on the sand table. It was Chusu's current position. Chusu was in a remote corner of the estate. This was a garden, and he was in the deepest part of the rockery. Even though it was winter, the cave was still rather humid. This made him feel very comfortable. He knew that Chun Changsheng had gone to the Tang clan's old estate today, and he even knew that the Mountly Sword Sect disciple had remained in the Taoist church. In the past, he would have definitely sneaked into the Taoist church and killed that Mountly Sword Sect disciple, but he had not done this, because he had always felt that this was a trap laid down by the orthodoxy. He squatted at the entrance to the cave, deep within the rockery, the moss-covered stones around him seeming to become one with him. As he gazed at the nearby black smoke and heat, his eyes revealed an irritated and callous expression. Chusu did not know what had happened in the Tang clan's old estate, but he knew that there was a problem with the second branch of the Tang clan. However, he was not worried. Even if Qin Changsheng had managed to convince the Tang old master, he did not believe that anyone could capture him. Whether it was his speed or his ability to escape through the earth, he was extremely confident. If an expert really did find him, he could just escape. At this moment, he suddenly sensed that the snowstorm in the sky had changed. It was not because of the speed or shape of the snowstorm, but because the chi of the world concealed within had changed, revealing a murderous intent. Chapter 847. His pupils rapidly constricted to the size of mung beans, surging with boundless wariness and rage. Someone had discovered him. He did not know who this person was or what method they had used to determine his position in such a large estate. But as the successor of the Yellow Springs flow, he was extremely sensitive to danger. Even Jishio and Nank were somewhat inferior to him in this aspect. He could clearly sense an ill omen. Without any need to think, he acted on instinct like a wild beast, about to use the earth escape technique to leave. A thud came from the depths of the fake mountain as the moss-covered stone cracked and rolled away. Chusu had not been able to leave. He still stood at his original spot, his head and body covered in stone and mud, his expression somewhat perplexed. What was going on here? The moment those two fortune-tellers confirmed Chusu's identity, the attack began. Each of the 7 peddlers had a string of copper coins on their wrists. The string snapped, carrying bits of snow with it as it fell on the sand table, smashing against those seemingly real pavilions and terraces that had been shrunk countless times. At the same time, the banner in the other fortune-teller's hand suddenly straightened. The wind and snow howled, and the banner fluttered in the wind. It was like a banner. The Wunshui suddenly surged with countless waves. Even the water grass in the deepest depths began to madly dance, and countless fish fled in fright. A tremor came from the ground and quickly spread to the surface. The two shores of the Wunshui began to fiercely quake. Miraculously, the buildings of the estate on the surface were unharmed. Countless cries of alarm rose from the estate. The people who had been cursing and swearing a moment ago now held their heads and ran around. The Tang's second master stood in front of the scorched ruins, still motionless as he imagined the beautiful and secluded Tong cottage a moment ago. He knew that this tremor meant that the array had been activated. Then he turned his head and muttered to himself, "Even Five Kind Man has come. Father, just what are you thinking?" It seemed like he did not care about Chusu's life or death, or even whether Chusu would be captured. Why was this? The complicated array that the Tang clan had left on the two shores of the Wunshui and had lain dormant for many years was activated. Ancient Qi emerged from the ground, shrouding the estate in layer after layer. Upon realizing that he could not escape through the ground, Chusu reacted with incredible speed. Transforming into a gray blur, he shot off into the distance. He had already pushed his speed to the limit. Even if Neng came, she would only be able to follow him at most and would not be able to outrun him. However, he was still unable to outrun the expanding speed of the Great Formation. When he arrived at the periphery of the manor, several miles away, the surface of light had already risen from the ground to the sky, forming a complete semicircle without any gaps. Without even thinking, Chusu charged at the surface of light, wanting to rely on his incomparably tough body and lightning-fast speed to crash through. With a soft, sizzling sound, a greenish-yellow smoke burst out from the surface of his body. Chusu grunted in pain and retreated. Lowering his head to glance at his body, he saw that a deep wound had appeared where the light of the array had touched. A thick liquid was gushing out, dripping onto the stone slabs with a hissing sound and quickly corroding a small hole. He raised his head and looked at the surface of light in front of him. He knew that it would be very difficult to break through it head-on, so he couldn't help but let out an angry howl. Since it was difficult to break through this formation, how could they break it? Naturally, it was to kill the people controlling the array. The howling winds scattered the greenish-yellow smoke into the surroundings, now many times thinner than before. But those flowers that were still blooming in the depths of winter withered upon encountering the smoke, instantly poisoned to death. Chusu vanished. A few moments later, he was on the other side of the manor, by the Wenshui. He gazed at the peddlers and fortune-tellers on the other side of the river, a hint of astonishment flashing through his cold and sinister eyes. Those people clearly had very ordinary cheese, so how could they control such a terrifying array, break his concealment technique, and trap him here? In this tense moment, he had no time to ponder this question. He only thought about how he could cross the Wenshui and kill those people. The array enveloped the two shores of the Wenshui. The surface of light that separated the world was several li away, deep within the manor. Logically speaking, he could very easily cross the river and attack those people controlling the array. But he could see very clearly and sense even more clearly. The most powerful eye of the light array just happened to be above the Wenshui. He was the successor to the Yellow Springs flow, the embodiment of evil left behind by the previous sectmaster of the Longevity sect. His entire body was sinister and his soul tainted. Crossing the river would assuredly trigger the eye of the light array. When that happened, he would have to face the full power of the array. No matter how arrogant and cold-blooded he was, he did not dare to use his body to resist the Tang clan's great array. He had to think of another method. If it were any other school, a naturally sinister and filthy person like him would have absolutely no way of evading the eye of the light array. But after he was born, he cultivated the most orthodox and most ancient divine arts of the Orthodox Taoist faith, so he just happened to possess this ability. A phrase with an incomprehensible meaning that vaguely resembled a Taoist hymn slowly emerged from his lips and teeth. He sat cross-legged on the ground and formed a lotus seal, his expression solemn. His hands, covered in black fur and scales, welcomed the dancing snow in the sky. An indescribable divine qi gradually seeped out of his deformed and small body, completely enveloping him. It was like blazing lava wrapping around a black and cold stone. Anyone would only be able to see the bright, red, and incomparably bright surface. They would never be able to see the true scene within. Chusu vanished into the boundless light over the Wenshui. It was like a snowflake falling on a snowy plain, a drop of water falling into the ocean. 10,000 rays of light shone on the river. Even though the wind and snow outside were weeping and complaining, the Wenshui seemed to be at dusk extremely warm. But Chusu's disappearance added an indescribable change to this scene. It was a very strange feeling, like a ghost had entered the depths of the abyss and could no longer be found. Even more frightening was that if Chusu used the 10,000 rays of light to conceal himself and silently approach the opposite shore, how could those peddlers and fortune-tellers possibly escape his sneak attack? For some reason, even though those peddlers and fortune-tellers had clearly seen the bloody dot on the model vanish, and at the same time, Chusu vanish into the light, possibly heading toward them, their expressions remained indifferent, wooden, and without the slightest hint of worry. Perhaps it was because there was one type of person among them that was also a ghost. Ghosts entered the depths of the abyss and were extremely difficult to find. What they were also looking for a ghost. There were no true ghosts in the world, but to many people, the government office was hell, and the government laborers were ghosts that demanded their lives. 6 government laborers appeared on the shore, standing 10 some zhang apart. Their bodies were wrapped in metal chains, and their left hands gripped cudgels of water and fire. Both the chains and the cudgels were very old. having been used for many years. They were covered in rust and the stench of blood, exuding a murderous aura and also a sinister aura. The 10,000 rays of light from the river fell on their bodies, but they were still incapable of dispersing the sinister, murderous aura of the government laborers. Chapter 848. Suddenly, the 6 government laborers untied the chains on their bodies and threw them into the light above the river. The seemingly empty light suddenly resounded with the clattering of metal, followed by a furious howl. It was obvious that this furious howl was filled with surprise and shock. The 6 chains in the air became perfectly straight and began to fiercely tremble. One end of the chains was in the light, while the other end was held in the hands of the government laborers. The government laborers silently began to retreat, at the same time pulling back the chains. The stone slabs on the shore began to crumble under their boots. It was like the ends of the chains were tied to something extremely heavy. The rays of light above the river dimmed for a few moments. A thin and small black figure gradually appeared in the air above the river. The 6 chains were tied to his 4 legs, neck, and a tail that had at some point burst out his pants. Chusu had actually been dragged back from the light by these government laborers. An incomparably cold chi traveled along the chains and invaded Chusu's body. He could clearly sense that although it was similarly cold, the chi coming from the chains was not the same as his innate poison. The chi coming from the chains was even more solemn, imbued with the aura of an official. The sinister appearance was brimming with an undisguised killing intent. The sinister killing intent of these government laborers was not as powerful as Chusu's sinister and filthy chill, but it was more tenacious. For a moment, Chusu was unable to escape the chains. He knew that he was in an extremely dangerous situation. If he could not break these chains in the shortest time possible, the sinister killing intent coming from the chains would lock onto his soul, and the array on the 2 shores of the Wenshui would soon send down a bolt of lightning to annihilate him. An extremely sinister and ruthless howl rose from the water. The 6 chains fiercely trembled as if on the verge of snapping. With a rip, Chusu's black clothes were torn to shreds. 2 extremely ugly gray wings of flesh flew through the air, rapidly flapping in the wind and snow. Countless wisps of black smoke imbued with a sinister and filthy chi emerged from his 2 wings. With unimaginable speed, he lunged at the 6 government laborers on the shore. The black smoke shrouded his body, obscuring his face. Everyone knew that this black smoke was the most sinister and filthy poison in the world. Just touching a little of it was enough to kill. The expressions of the 6 bailiffs did not change at all. Their left hands tightly gripped the iron chains, their right hands wielding the water and fire cudgels as they struck into the air. The staff techniques of the government laborers didn't seem to be very exquisite, but there was a mysterious feeling hidden within the staff. It was actually somewhat similar to the Orthodox Academy's Toppling Mountain staff. The Toppling Mountain staff of the Orthodox Academy spoke of commandments, rules, and rules of the Academy. Since the staff techniques of these bailiffs were related to the mountain toppling staff, they were naturally of the same origin. They were still talking about commandments and rules. It was just that their cudgels of water and fire didn't follow the rules of the Academy, but rather the family rules. This was the Tang family's discipline. The rules of the Academy were like a mountain, and so were the family rules. If I say I'm going to hit you, I'm definitely going to hit you. The staff was like a falling mountain. Even if you were as fast as lightning and as enchanting as smoke, how could you dodge it? Boom, 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 boom. A series of explosions rang out, and the snow and wind in front of the shore suddenly dispersed, revealing a dozen or so white vortexes. Several white vortexes exploded around Chusu's body. The water and fire cudgel, which seemed to have grown many times longer, fell on his body with incomparable accuracy, producing an extremely dull sound of impact. A mouthful of black blood spurted from his mouth, his warped face brimming with pain and rage. He could not dodge these descending cudgels, or else he would never find another chance to win. The muffled thuds of the water and fire cudgels striking his tough body resounded over the Wenshui, and the incomparably bright eye of the array sprayed with black blood. In the end, he had managed to endure, passing through the layers of cudgels to reach the shore. He was only several zhang away from the 6 bailiffs, and he only needed to stretch out his hand to kill them. At this moment, the 6 bailiffs did something that no one had expected. They loosened the chains in their hands, seemingly completely unconcerned that Chusu would escape. Then they straightened their 6 cudgels of water and fire, using them as a fence to protect themselves as they retreated. These bailiffs had retreated? Then who on the shore would deal with Chusu and kill those peddlers and fortune-tellers responsible for controlling the array? With Chusu's arrival, countless wisps of extremely foul black fog swiftly pervaded the shore. The grass and fish in the water instantly died upon contact. Just when the black fog was about to reach the peddlers and fortune-tellers, it was suddenly torn apart. It was like the deepest darkness had been torn in two by someone high up in the sky. What had torn apart the black fog were 2 extremely ordinary fists. On the shore were 2 elders selling sesame candy. The moment Chusu arrived, they had put away the green cloth on the stall in front of them, preventing the sesame candy from getting even a speck of dust, and then walked out. They bent their knees, lowered their waists, calmed their minds, clenched their fists, and punched. Their actions were plain and ordinary, devoid of the demeanor of a cultivating expert. They were more like a boxing master performing in the countryside. Only true cultivators would be able to understand the beauty of these 2 fists. Plain and ordinary meant that they treated this matter as a simple meal. Ordinary meant that they treated this matter as something ordinary. This was true neutrality and peace. And they were using the most orthodox techniques of the imperial clan. Boundless light exuded from their fists. Unlike the light in the array, the light exuded from their fists had no divine aura, only heat. Their fists exuded boundless heat, making them look like 2 blazing suns. The foul and gloomy black fog that had followed Chusu was instantly torn to shreds. The hiss of ablation could be heard all over the river. The blazing sun style. How could there be someone from the imperial clan? Chusu's terrified shout rose from the depths of the black fog. His face and clothes were already covered in countless tiny holes, looking like sesame seeds evenly sprinkled on sesame candy. Countless streams of black blood spurted out of these holes, a gory and terrifying sight. The cries of alarm in the snowstorm transformed into howls of pain and fury, sounding like those of an ancient monster that had been wounded. He let out a strange cry as he lunged at the 2 elders, bringing with him a sky full of black blood. This black blood was his true blood, and it contained a poison many times thicker than the black fog. Even if his current opponent really was a member of the imperial clan and was using the most orthodox blazing sun style, it was still impossible for him to resist this black blood. The 2 elders turned grave. With a whoosh, they took off their long robes and prepared to punch again. At this moment, a little girl walked past them. Whether it was Chusu or the 2 sesame candy-selling elders, in this tense and dangerous moment of battle, they had all forgotten that there was a girl present. It was that cosmetic-buying girl. She had been buying cosmetic powder in Wenshui City for a very long time. Although she did not always run into a cosmetic powder stall or stand in front of a cosmetic powder store, she had already bought a lot. She had sprinkled this cosmetic powder into the sky. Red, white, pink, peach blossom, osmanthus, and even the cheapest gardenia. The surface of the river instantly became a world of cosmetic powder, countless fragrances mingling together. No matter how fast Chusu's movement technique was, how could he avoid this powder that pervaded the world? How could he avoid the fragrance? The fragrance assailed him. The cosmetic powder and fragrance fell on his body. A look of horror appeared in his eyes, and then they were dyed red, white, and pink. He even felt like his soul and blood had become more fragrant. He realized that he had been poisoned. How could this be? Chapter 849. The powder the girl had sprinkled was naturally poison. Chusu was the successor of the Yellow Springs, a remnant of corpse beheading. His entire body was covered in filthy cold poison, so logically speaking, he should not be afraid of any poison. But this powder was no ordinary poison, but the poison of the Tang clan. If a true elder like Shang Xingzhou saw this sight, they would assuredly recall even more distant history. What did the Tang clan of the Southwest rely on to peacefully pass so many years under the watch of countless experts of the divine domain? Why were the successive heads of the Tang clan so mysterious and terrifying? Because the Tang clan was most skilled in and most terrifying at using poison. But as time passed, almost no one remembered this point. As he felt his meridians rapidly wither and his true blood flow out, Chusu truly was about to go crazy. In his view, these government laborers, peddlers, and fortune-tellers were all very ordinary in terms of cultivation and strength. In normal times, he would have been able to deal with those two elders who knew the blazing sun style and that poison-using girl. However, their cooperation with each other was so harmonious that there were no loopholes. They did not give him any chance to counterattack and directly trapped him in a dangerous situation. This sort of feeling truly made him abnormally angry, furious, and pained. A scream burst from his blood-stained lips. Countless fine ripples appeared on the surface of the river, the poisoned fish and snakes splitting inch by inch. Black blood sprayed in all directions, and then he used the most orthodox divine technique of the longevity sect to transform it into black mist. The black mist was blown into countless strands by the wind, each strand seeming to have a life of its own, twisting into snakes and gradually revealing its face. Those faces were indistinct at first, but then they became clear, their facial features becoming clearer, their fangs, bones, and claws appearing. They were either savage or callous, all sinister ghosts. Countless ghosts formed from the blood mist rushed towards the people on the shore with sharp blades in their hands. Ear-piercing sounds came from the 6 chains, and black sparks appeared on the cudgels of water and fire. The fortune-teller's banners fluttered in the wind, while the peddler's hands were already on the sand table. The 2 sesame candy-selling elders prepared to punch again, but the girl's hand once more grasped a handful of powder. Just when Chusu was prepared to use his most powerful technique, even if his body and soul were shattered, he would still kill all the people on the shore. The sound of a zither suddenly rose from the shore. This zither melody was inferior to the one the demon lord had played in the snowy mountains, but it was equally breathtaking. If Zhu Yi were still alive, his first reaction upon hearing the zither music would still be to think of a way to escape. The sound of a zither had once sounded on the shore opposite the Taoist hall. The zither player was a blind zither player. At some point, the blind zither player had arrived on the shore. The blind zither player raised his head and glanced at Chusu. There were no black pupils in his eyes, only the whites of his eyes. They reflected the black blood and evil ghosts that filled the sky, making them look slightly gloomy. He clearly knew that his opponent could not see him, but Chusu felt like his body and mental world had been seen through. Fear surged into his heart, almost causing it to stop beating. He no longer dared to counterattack. Using his fastest speed, he broke free of the 5 chains and jumped into the Wenshui. The sound of the zither rang out continuously, traveling into the distance in the wind and snow. When the strings of the zither moved, heaven and earth responded. The soft snowflakes turned into the sharpest flying daggers. Above the river, the sky resounded with countless mournful and unpleasant wails. Countless evil ghosts screamed as they were cut into the finest pieces. The snowflakes were dyed gray and black. They fell into the river and could no longer be seen, just like Chusu falling into the river. Light shone over the Wenshui, but Chusu's figure could no longer be seen, only an afterimage on the water. His speed was too fast, even faster than the speed at which a shadow could vanish. The blind zither player looked into the distance, ignoring him. His withered fingers continued to pluck at the zither, but the tune had changed. The song he was playing now was called Yellow River, which Xiu Shanjun had sung that evening. The sound of the zither seemed to materialize, falling on the surface of the river. The droplets of water splashed into the air like golden liquid. The afterimage was silently severed. A miserable scream of pain came from somewhere. A severed tail, accompanied by black blood, fell from the sky. Chusu had not been hiding in the river, but once more in the eye of the array of light. With a metallic clang, a chain was thrown into the air and wrapped around the severed tail. The girl sprinkled cosmetic powder on the severed tail like she was cooking or marinating it. Bound by the chains, the tail continued to struggle like a living creature. Gradually, it came to a stop. Only then did it truly die. An old man selling sesame candy came forward and wrapped the broken tail with the craft paper that was used to wrap candy. After doing this, they turned to the blind zither player. The government laborers, the peddlers, the fortune teller, the old man selling sesame candy, and the cosmetic powder girl were the Tang clan's five-kind man. But they were not all of them. They were the five-kind of five-kind man. Besides them, there was one more person. That person was their teacher and also their leader. 3 li to the west. The 7 peddlers continued to maintain the array. The wind blew at the banner, and the fortune teller once more sought out Chusu. The government laborers carried the chains on their backs and cudgels of water and fire, prepared to continue the pursuit. The sesame candy elder and cosmetic powder girl also began to pack up their things. Their faces were expressionless and very calm. Since the blind zither player had taken action, no matter how skilled Chusu was in concealment or how insidious his methods were, only death awaited him. The blind zither player did not move. The government laborers, the peddlers, the elder, and the girl all turned to him. Enough! The blind zither player closed his eyes and continued to play the zither. Time did not flow at the exact same speed. This was true for different people with different moods, and it was also true for the beginning and end of an event. As one approached the boundary of time, the flow of time would often speed up. The mahjong game in the Tang clan's old estate had already stopped. The mahjong game in the ancestral hall had also reached its end. The 2 hours were almost up. The 3 people at the table were clearly growing more and more nervous, the sweat on their foreheads increasing. 16th uncle, you and 17th uncle are twins and have always been close. I presume that you definitely want to avenge him. Tang 36 looked at one of them and said, but you need to understand that he was not killed by the demon lord, nor was he killed by the pope. He was killed by second uncle. The Tang's 16th master's expression suddenly changed. He stared at him and said, evidence. Tang 36 said, because of the cinnabar pill incident, a bishop of the Hall of Illustrious Persons was expelled from the Li Palace. You should know this person. The Tang's 16th master's face gradually turned gloomy. He accompanied 17th to Gaoyang village. Tang 36 glanced at the card in his hand and said, he did not die. The Tang's 16th master said, no matter who did it, even if it was second brother, there's no reason for him to still be alive. Tang 36 raised his head and glanced at him. This illustrates a principle. Suicide is always more difficult than murder. The Tang's 16th master suddenly stood up and said, give him to me. Tang 36 lowered his head and began to sort through the cards. That will depend on whether 16th uncle is willing to give me what I want.